What would you do if the person who cleaned your floors turned out to be more talented than the world-class performer you paid thousands to see? Picture this: Manhattan's most exclusive arts venue, a charity gala packed with billionaires, celebrities, and socialites, crystal chandeliers casting golden light over designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. And there, under a single spotlight sitting at a Steinway grand piano worth more than most people's homes, is a man in a janitor's uniform. His hands hover over the keys. 300 of the world's wealthiest people hold their breath. Some are confused, others are curious. A few are already laughing, thinking this must be some kind of joke. But it wasn't a joke. Every eye was on him. Every breath held. The silence in that room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. This moment would change everything. For him, for everyone watching, for what they thought they knew about talent, about worth, about who deserves to be seen. How did he get here? And what happened when he touched those keys? To understand what happened next, we need to go back 48 hours to a man nobody noticed, to a life lived in the shadows, to a gift buried so deep that even he had forgotten it was there. This is the story of Jerome Walker. And trust me, you've never heard anything like it. Jerome Walker was 47 years old, and if you passed him on the street, you wouldn't look twice. He was the kind of man who had learned to make himself invisible. Not because he wanted to be, but because life had taught him that being invisible was safer, easier, less painful. For the past 5 years, Jerome worked as a night shift janitor at the Pembroke Arts Center in Manhattan. It was one of those venues where ticket prices started at $300 and went up from there. The kind of place where champagne flowed freely, where famous musicians performed, where the elite gathered to see and be seen. Jerome cleaned their toilets. He mopped their marble floors. He emptied their trash bins filled with half-eaten caviar and discarded programs. He worked from 11 at night until 7 in the morning when the cleaning had to be done, but couldn't disturb the important people. He was good at his job, thorough, reliable, quiet. His supervisor had once written in his annual review that Jerome was the most dependable employee they had precisely because he never caused problems, never asked for anything, never drew attention to himself. But Jerome hadn't always been invisible. 47 years ago, he was born in Baltimore, in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and dreams were expensive luxuries most people couldn't afford. His father left before Jerome could walk. His mother worked 3 jobs, sometimes 4, just to keep their tiny apartment and put food on the table. But Jerome had something. A gift. Something that showed itself when he was just 4 years old. His elementary school had an old beaten-up piano in the music room. Most of the keys stuck. Some didn't make any sound at all. But one day during recess, little Jerome wandered into that room and sat down at that broken piano. His music teacher found him there an hour later playing a melody he'd heard on the radio that morning. Not just picking out the notes, but playing it. With both hands, with feeling. The teacher called Jerome's mother immediately. This wasn't normal, she said. This was extraordinary. This was the kind of talent you saw maybe once in a career if you were lucky. Jerome's mother couldn't afford piano lessons. She could barely afford groceries. But that teacher, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, she did something remarkable. She gave Jerome lessons for free. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, for 6 years, she taught him everything she knew. And Jerome soaked it up like a sponge. By the time he was 10, he was playing Chopin. By 12, Rachmaninoff. By 14, he was performing in local competitions and winning every single time. Everyone said the same thing. This kid is going somewhere. This kid is special. This kid is going to be famous. When Jerome was 17, he auditioned for Juilliard, the most prestigious music school in America. Out of 3,000 applicants, they accepted only 60. Jerome was one of them. Full scholarship. His mother cried for 3 days straight. He was on his way. Everything he'd worked for, everything his mother had sacrificed, for everything Mrs. Henderson had believed in, it was all coming true. Jerome was going to escape Baltimore, escape poverty, escape the life that had been written for him before he was born. And then his mother got sick. Jerome was 19 years old, 2 months away from starting at Juilliard, when his mother collapsed at work. The doctors said it was a stroke, a bad one. She survived, but she couldn't work anymore. She could barely walk. She needed constant care. Jerome had a choice. Go to New York and chase his dream, or stay in Baltimore and take care of the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. It wasn't really a choice at all. He called Juilliard. He explained the situation. They were sympathetic but firm. If he didn't start that fall, his spot would go to someone else. The scholarship wouldn't be held. He could reapply the following year, but there were no guarantees. Jerome stayed in Baltimore. He got a job at a warehouse, then another job driving a delivery truck, then a third job cleaning office buildings at night. He worked 18-hour days to pay for his mother's medical bills, to keep their apartment, to keep her alive. He told himself it was temporary, just until his mother recovered, just until he saved enough money to go back to audition again, to reclaim his dream. But his mother never fully recovered, and the money never accumulated. And the years kept passing. 1 year became 5. 5 became 10. 10 became 28. Jerome hadn't touched a piano in 28 years. He'd made peace with it, or at least he told himself he had. Some people were meant to have extraordinary lives, and some people were meant to keep the world running while others lived those extraordinary lives. He was the latter, and that was okay. That had to be okay, because if it wasn't okay, if he let himself feel the full weight of everything he'd lost, everything he'd given up, he wasn't sure he could survive it. So Jerome cleaned floors, he took out trash, he made himself invisible, and he told himself he was fine. The Pembroke Arts Center was a temple to culture and wealth. Built in 1923 by railroad magnate Augustus Pembroke. The building was all marble columns, vaulted ceilings, and architectural details that whispered old money and artistic refinement. The main performance hall seated 800 people and had acoustics so perfect that a whisper on stage could be heard in the last row. Jerome had been working there for 5 years. He knew every inch of the building. He knew which bathroom stalls leaked, which floorboards creaked, which windows let in drafts. He knew the building better than most of the people who performed there. His shift started at 11 p.m. after the last performance ended, and the last wealthy patron drove away in their town car. He'd arrive through the service entrance change into his gray uniform and get his assignments from the night supervisor. Most nights it was routine: vacuum the carpets in the lobby, clean the bathrooms, wipe down the brass railings, mop the kitchen, empty all the trash, make sure everything was spotless before the morning staff arrived. Jerome worked alone most of the time, which suited him fine. The less he interacted with people, the less they saw him, the easier everything was. But there was one person he talked to: Raymond Cooper, the night security guard. Raymond was 62, a retired NYPD officer who took the security job because he got bored sitting at home, and his pension wasn't quite enough to cover his grandkids' birthday presents. Raymond and Jerome would share coffee in the break room around 3 a.m. when the building was at its quietest. They didn't talk about much. Sports, mostly. Weather, lottery numbers, safe topics. But Raymond knew. Somehow, after working together for 3 years, Raymond had coaxed the truth out of Jerome one night, when Jerome had been particularly tired and his defenses were down. Raymond knew about Juilliard. about Jerome's mother, about the 28 years of silence. Raymond never brought it up unless Jerome did first. But sometimes when they were drinking their coffee, Raymond would say something like, "You know, Jerry, it ain't too late. You're only 47. Some people don't find their calling until they're 60. And Jerome would smile and change the subject because it was too late. That ship had sailed so long ago that Jerome couldn't even see it on the horizon anymore. The Pembroke Arts Center attracted the cream of New York's cultural elite. On any given night, you might see Broadway stars, famous authors, tech billionaires, or politicians in the audience. The center's director, Victoria Ashford, made sure of that. Victoria was 53, impeccably dressed, and utterly committed to the Pembroke's reputation as Manhattan's most prestigious arts venue. She ran the center with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Everything had to be perfect. Every performance had to be flawless. Every detail had to reinforce the Pembroke's brand of exclusive, sophisticated excellence. Victoria barely noticed the cleaning staff. To her, they were like the heating system or the electrical wiring necessary infrastructure that should function invisibly and never call attention to itself. The few times Victoria had directly interacted with Jerome, it was to point out something he'd missed or hadn't done to her standards. Her tone was always clipped dismissive, the way you might speak to a malfunctioning appliance. The brass railing on the 3rd floor has fingerprints. Please address it. Someone left a coffee cup in the donor's lounge. Make sure all rooms are thoroughly checked. Try not to vacuum near the rehearsal hall between 2 and 4. The musicians complain about the noise. Jerome always nodded, apologized if necessary, and fixed whatever needed fixing. He never pushed back, never explained, never tried to be seen. That was the arrangement. They paid him $13 an hour to be invisible, and he played his part. But sometimes late at night, when Jerome was alone in the main performance hall, mopping the stage after a concert, he would stop and look at the piano. It was always there, of course. The Pembroke's Steinway Model D concert grand, worth nearly $200,000. 9 feet of polished ebony perfection, sitting center stage like a sleeping giant. Jerome would stand there, mop in hand, and remember. Remember what it felt like to sit at a piano. Remember the weight of the keys under his fingers. Remember the moment right before you start to play, when the music exists as pure potential and you're about to transform it into sound, into emotion, into something real. Then he'd shake his head, finish mopping, and move on to the next task. Because remembering was dangerous. Remembering hurt, and Jerome had gotten very good at not feeling things that hurt. Victoria Ashford sat in her office on the Pembroke's 3rd floor, reviewing the final details for the annual foundation gala. This was the event that defined her year, the night when everything she'd built her reputation on was put on display. The Pembroke Foundation Gala was more than just a fundraiser. It was a social occasion where being invited mattered almost as much as the cause itself. This year's guest list included 2 senators, 5 billionaires, a dozen celebrities, and countless other members of New York's elite who could write 6-figure checks without blinking. The gala's purpose was to raise money for arts education programs in underfunded schools. Noble cause, tax-deductible donations, good publicity. Everyone won. This year's fundraising goal was $5 million. Last year, they'd raised $4.2 million, and Victoria was determined to exceed that. She'd spent months planning every detail. The catering menu featured dishes from a Michelin 3-star chef. The floral arrangements cost more than most people's cars. And the entertainment, well, that was the crown jewel. Preston Caldwell, world-renowned pianist. He'd performed at Carnegie Hall, the Sydney Opera House, and for 3 different presidents. His albums had won Grammys. His performances sold out months in advance, and Victoria had booked him for the gala. Getting Preston hadn't been easy. His fee was astronomical, and his schedule was booked years in advance. But Victoria had connections, and she'd used every one of them. Preston's appearance guaranteed that tickets to the gala would sell instantly, and that donations would flow freely. You couldn't put a price on prestige, but if you could, Preston Caldwell would be it. Victoria looked at her checklist. Catering confirmed, flowers confirmed, seating arrangements finalized, security briefed, lighting and sound tested twice, cleaning staff scheduled, including that quiet janitor Jerome something. Everything was perfect. Nothing could go wrong. Meanwhile, 3 floors below Jerome was in the supply closet loading his cart with trash bags cleaning solution and fresh mop heads. He'd been assigned to work the gala, which meant he'd be there during the event itself, staying out of sight, but available to handle any messes or emergencies. He didn't mind. The extra shift meant extra pay, and he could use it. His mother's medications had gotten more expensive, and her caretaker's rates had just gone up. Jerome had seen parts of previous galas while working. He'd watched from the shadows of the hallway as beautiful people in expensive clothes laughed and drank and celebrated. He'd heard the music drifting through the walls. He'd cleaned up after them, picking up discarded programs and wiping champagne stains off furniture. It was just another night of being invisible. Just another reminder of the 2 worlds that existed in the same building, the world on stage and the world behind it, and the uncrossable distance between them. Jerome loaded the last supplies onto his cart and headed toward the service elevator. As he passed the main performance hall, he heard music. Someone was rehearsing. He paused just for a moment, listening. Piano. Beethoven's Piano. Sonata. Number 14. Moonlight Sonata. One of the most beautiful pieces ever written, and one of the first pieces Jerome had learned to play back when he was 12 years old. The pianist playing was technically proficient, but emotionally cold. The notes were accurate, but they didn't sing. They didn't breathe. It was like watching someone read a love letter in monotone. Jerome stood there for 30 seconds, listening, remembering how he would have played it. Then he caught himself. This was exactly the kind of dangerous thinking he couldn't afford. He pushed his cart toward the elevator and got back to work. What Jerome didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that in less than 48 hours, everything was about to change. A disaster was coming. A moment that would shatter his carefully maintained invisibility and force him to choose between safety and something he thought he'd buried forever. The gala was 2 days away, and the clock was already ticking. The Pembroke Arts Centre transformed in the days leading up to the gala. What was normally an elegant but understated venue became something out of a fever dream of wealth and sophistication. Florists arrived with trucks full of white orchids, roses, and exotic blooms, whose names Jerome couldn't pronounce. They covered every available surface, turning the lobby into an indoor garden. The arrangements in the main hall alone cost $40,000. Catering staff set up in the kitchen, hauling in cases of champagne that cost more per bottle than Jerome made in a week. The head chef, a temperamental Frenchman named Philippe, screamed at his sous chefs in a mixture of French and English as they prepared for the 5-course dinner. Lighting technicians hung crystal decorations that would catch and refract the chandelier light, creating what the designer called an atmosphere of refined opulence. Sound engineers tested and retested the acoustics, making sure that every note from the piano would reach every corner of the hall with perfect clarity. And through it all, Jerome cleaned. He stayed out of everyone's way, worked around the chaos, and made sure that beneath all the decoration and preparation, the basics were handled. Bathrooms spotless, floors gleaming, trash removed. The invisible work that made everything else possible. On the morning of the gala, Victoria Ashford arrived at 7 a.m., 4 hours earlier than usual. She walked through the entire venue with a clipboard checking every detail. She ran her finger along the brass railings, inspecting for fingerprints. She examined the flower arrangements, making sure none of the blooms were wilted. She tested the temperature in each room, ensuring perfect climate control. When she entered the main performance hall, Victoria stopped and smiled. This was it. This was what she'd been working toward. The room was perfection itself. 800 chairs arranged in perfect rows. The stage gleaming under carefully positioned lights. And there center stage the Steinway piano polished to a mirror shine, waiting for Preston Caldwell's masterful touch. Victoria's phone rang. Her assistant, a nervous young woman named Melissa. Preston's flight landed 20 minutes ago. He's on his way to the hotel. His manager confirmed he'll arrive at the venue by 5 p.m. for sound check. Excellent, Victoria said. Make sure his dressing room has everything on his rider. Sparkling water, specific temperature. Fresh fruit, organic only. And for God's sake, make sure no one bothers him before the performance. Already done, Ms. Ashford. Victoria hung up and took one more look around the hall. Tonight was going to be perfect. Absolutely perfect. That afternoon, Jerome arrived for his shift 3 hours early. On gala nights, there was always extra work. He'd be on call throughout the event, ready to handle any emergency clean, any spill fix, any problem that might arise. He changed into his uniform and started his rounds. The venue was buzzing with activity. Staff members rushed around making last-minute adjustments. The catering team was setting up the dining room. Security personnel were checking credentials and communication systems. Jerome moved through it all like a ghost. People stepped around him without acknowledging he was there. He was part of the infrastructure, no more notable than a doorway or a light fixture. At 4:30 p.m., the first guests began to arrive. Luxury cars pulled up to the entrance. Women in gowns that cost more than Jerome's annual salary stepped out, followed by men in custom-tailored tuxedos. Photographers snapped pictures. A red carpet had been rolled out, because even a charity gala for the ultra-wealthy needed the trappings of glamour. Jerome watched from a second-floor window as the elite of New York society filed into the building. He recognized some faces from television. A tech billionaire whose company had revolutionized social media. An actress who'd won an Oscar 2 years ago. A senator who was rumored to be considering a presidential run. These were the people who shaped the world, who made decisions that affected millions, who lived lives of such wealth and influence that they might as well exist in a different universe from someone like Jerome. And tonight, they were all here to enjoy music, raise money for a good cause, and feel good about their generosity. Tonight, they would watch a master pianist perform, never knowing that a real master was standing 3 floors above them, watching through a window, invisible as always. At 5 p.m., Preston Caldwell arrived. Jerome happened to be on the first floor, replacing a burned-out light bulb in the hallway when Preston made his entrance. Even Jerome had to admit the man had presence. Preston was 42, tall and lean, with carefully styled silver-streaked hair, and the kind of confident bearing that came from a lifetime of being told you were exceptional. Preston swept through the lobby with his entourage, his manager, his assistant, and a woman who appeared to be his personal masseuse. He didn't acknowledge any of the Pembroke staff who greeted him. He moved like royalty, like someone whose time and attention were precious commodities, not to be wasted on ordinary interactions. Victoria appeared all smiles and gracious welcome. Mr. Caldwell, such an honor to have you. Your dressing room is ready, and we're all set for your sound check whenever you're ready. Preston barely looked at her. I need 30 minutes to center myself. Then I'll do sound check. Make sure the piano is properly tuned. Last venue I played had the tuning off by almost a quarter tone. Completely unacceptable. Of course, Mr. Caldwell. Of course, Mr. Forrest. Our piano is maintained to the highest standards, but our tuner will be standing by if any adjustments are needed. Preston nodded and continued toward his dressing room. As he passed Jerome, who was on a ladder changing the light bulb, Preston didn't even glance up. But his assistant did. Watch it, the assistant snapped at Jerome. Mr. Caldwell needs a clear path. Jerome was a good 8 feet away, nowhere near Preston's path, but he nodded and stayed perfectly still on his ladder until the entourage passed. This was the world. This was how it worked. Some people mattered, and some people didn't. Jerome had learned that lesson a long time ago. What he didn't know was that in less than 3 hours, that lesson was about to be challenged in a way nobody could have predicted. By 6 p.m., the Pembroke Arts Center was in full bloom. The gala had officially begun, and the cream of New York society filled the lobby holding champagne flutes and making conversation that ranged from art to politics to the latest scandals in high society. Jerome worked the periphery, emptying trash bins that hadn't even had time to fill up, wiping down surfaces that didn't need cleaning, staying busy and invisible. That was the key on nights like this: look busy, stay out of the way, and never, ever make eye contact with the guests. He watched as Victoria worked the room, gliding from one conversation to another, her smile never wavering, her charm always perfectly calibrated. This was her element. This was what she'd built her career on: the ability to make wealthy people feel special, feel appreciated, feel like their money and their presence mattered. At 7 p.m., the doors to the dining room opened, and the guests filtered in for dinner. Jerome had been instructed to stay completely out of sight during the meal. He positioned himself in a back hallway, near the kitchen, available if needed, but invisible to the guests. The meal lasted 90 minutes. 5 courses, each one a masterpiece of culinary art. Jerome could smell the food from his position in the hallway, and his stomach rumbled. He'd had a quick sandwich at home before his shift, but that felt like a long time ago. At 8:30 p.m., the guests moved from the dining room to the main performance hall. This was it. The moment everyone had been waiting for. Preston Caldwell's performance. Jerome followed the last stragglers of guests at a careful distance, then slipped into the back of the hall through a side entrance. He positioned himself in the shadows near the rear exit, where he could see the stage, but where guests wouldn't see him unless they specifically looked for him. The lights dimmed. Victoria stepped onto the stage with a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Your generosity and support make our work possible, and tonight we're honored to present one of the greatest pianists of our generation. Please welcome Preston Caldwell. The audience applauded as Preston walked onto the stage. He wore a custom tuxedo and carried himself with the assurance of someone who knew exactly how good he was. He sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and let his hands hover over the keys for a moment. Then, he began to play. Preston's program opened with Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was technically flawless. Every note was precise, every dynamic was calculated, every phrase was shaped exactly as the score indicated. But something was missing. Jerome could hear it immediately. The same thing he'd heard during the rehearsal 2 days ago. Technical perfection, without emotional depth. The notes were beautiful, but they didn't mean anything. It was like watching a perfect simulation of music, rather than music itself. Still, the audience was enraptured. Most of them probably couldn't tell the difference. They'd paid to see a famous pianist, and they were seeing a famous pianist. The music was elegant background to their own sense of sophistication and culture. Preston played for 15 minutes, moving through his program with the confidence of someone who'd played these pieces 1,000 times. When he finished the Chopin, the audience applauded enthusiastically. He transitioned into Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece so beautiful and well-known that even people who knew nothing about classical music recognized it. Again, technically perfect. Again, emotionally hollow. Jerome watched from the shadows, and despite himself, despite all his years of buried longing, he felt something stir in his chest. He imagined himself at that piano. He imagined how he would play these pieces. Where Preston held back, Jerome would lean in. Where Preston maintained careful control, Jerome would risk vulnerability. But these were just fantasies. Dangerous fantasies. Jerome had no business thinking about performing. That life was gone. That ship had sailed. This was his life now, watching from the shadows, while others took the stage. Preston finished the Debussy to another round of applause. He stood bowed gracefully and walked off stage for intermission. The performance would continue in 15 minutes after the audience had time to stretch, visit the restrooms, and refill their champagne glasses. Victoria was beaming. Everything was going perfectly. And then everything went wrong. Jerome was in the hallway outside the main hall when he heard shouting. Loud, frantic shouting. He moved toward the sound and found a small crowd gathered outside Preston's dressing room. Preston's manager was on her phone speaking rapidly. "I need a doctor immediately. No, I don't care what time it is. This is an emergency." Victoria pushed through the crowd. "What happened? What's wrong?" The manager looked up, her face pale. "Preston's sick. Food poisoning, we think. He's been vomiting for the past 10 minutes. He can barely stand." Victoria's face went from concern to horror. "Can he perform? He can't even walk in a straight line right now. We need to get him to a hospital. But the second half of the program is canceled," the manager said flatly. "I'm sorry, but there's no way he can play. He's done for the night." A paramedic team arrived 10 minutes later. They took Preston out through the service entrance to avoid the guests, but word was already spreading. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Something's wrong. Preston's sick. There might not be a second half." Victoria stood in the hallway, her face frozen in an expression of controlled panic. This was a disaster. An absolute catastrophe. 800 guests expecting a full performance. Potential donors who'd come specifically to see Preston Caldwell. The reputation of the Pembroke on the line. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. Emergency calls to every contact she had in the classical music world. "I need a pianist. Tonight. Right now." "Yes, I know it's short notice. I'll pay triple the usual fee. Please." But it was Friday night. Every professional pianist in New York was either performing somewhere else or unreachable. Call after call ended the same way. "So sorry, but there's no one available." After 20 minutes of frantic calls, Victoria was out of options. She'd have to go out on stage and make an announcement. Preston's unable to continue. "We apologize. Your ticket purchases will be refunded. The charity would lose its biggest fundraising night of the year. Her reputation would take a massive hit. This was a nightmare." Jerome stood at the end of the hallway, watching the chaos unfold. He felt sorry for Victoria despite how she'd treated him. He felt sorry for the foundation for the kids who needed those music programs. And deep inside, in a place he'd locked away for 28 years, he felt something else. A voice that whispered, "You could help. You could play." But that was crazy. Impossible. He was a janitor. Nobody would listen to him. Nobody would believe him. And even if they did, even if he got the chance, what if he failed? What if 28 years was too long and his hands didn't remember and he embarrassed himself in front of 800 people? No, it was better to stay silent. Better to stay invisible. Jerome turned to walk away. He had trash to collect, bathrooms to clean. That was his job. That was his place. But then he heard Victoria's voice breaking slightly despite her efforts to maintain composure. She was on the phone with someone, probably a board member. I know it's a disaster. I've called everyone. There's no one available. We're going to have to cancel. Yes, I understand what that means for the fundraising goal. I don't know what else to do. Jerome stopped walking. He thought about his mother, about the life she'd sacrificed for him, about Mrs. Henderson, who'd taught him for free because she believed in him. He thought about the thousands of kids out there, just like he'd been talented, but poor, needing someone to believe in them, needing programs that gave them a chance. $5 million. That's what this gala was supposed to raise. $5 million for arts education. For kids who couldn't afford piano lessons but had the gift. For kids who needed someone to say, "You matter. Your talent matters, don't give up." Jerome took a deep breath. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it. He thought, "This is insane. This is the stupidest thing you could possibly do." But his feet were already moving. He was walking toward Victoria. His mouth was opening. Words were coming out. "Ms. Ashford, I might be able to help." Victoria Ashford turned around, her phone still pressed to her ear. She looked at Jerome with the vague annoyance of someone interrupted during a crisis by someone irrelevant. "Not now," she said. "I'm dealing with an emergency. I know Jerome said." His voice was steadier than he expected. "I heard about Preston. I know you need a pianist." Victoria stared at him for a moment, then returned to her phone call. "Yes, I'm still here. Listen, let me call you back in 5 minutes." She hung up and turned her full attention to Jerome. "What did you just say?" I said, "I might be able to help." "With the piano." Victoria's expression shifted from confusion to something close to anger. "This isn't funny, Jerome. I don't have time for jokes." "I'm not joking, Ms. Ashford. I can play piano. I can perform the second half of the program." For a moment, Victoria just stared at him. Then she let out a harsh laugh. "You play piano? You're a janitor." "I am," Jerome said. "But I'm also a pianist, or I was. I trained for 15 years. I had a scholarship to Juilliard." Victoria's laugh died. She studied Jerome's face, looking for signs that this was some kind of prank or delusion. "You're serious?" "Yes, ma'am." "Juilliard?" "You, yes, ma'am." "I can show you my acceptance letter if you need proof, but I don't think we have time for that." Victoria glanced at her watch. The intermission was already running long. Guests were getting restless. In 10 minutes, she'd have to make some kind of announcement. "Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not saying I believe you, Julia, was how long ago? 28 years. 28 years. And you expect me to put you on stage in front of our most important donors, in front of people who paid thousands of dollars for tickets based on training you received almost 3 decades ago. I don't expect anything, Ms. Ashford. I'm just offering to help. Have you even touched a piano in the last 28 years? Jerome hesitated. No, ma'am, not to play, but I remember. I remember everything I learned. Victoria shook her head. This is insane. I can't possibly, Ms. Ashford. It was Melissa, Victoria's assistant, approaching with a tablet. The board chair is asking for an update. The guests are getting restless. We need to make an announcement soon. Victoria looked at Jerome, then at Melissa, then back at Jerome. Her mind was racing, calculating odds, weighing risks. If she canceled the gala, was a failure. Donations would plummet. Her reputation would suffer. The board might question her leadership. If she let this janitor perform, and he was terrible, it would be even worse. A humiliation, a laughingstock. The Pembroke Arts Center's name would be dragged through the mud. But if she let him try, and he was even halfway decent, it might save the night. It might salvage something from this disaster. "Can you prove it?" Victoria asked. "Right now. Can you prove you can actually play?" "Yes," Jerome said. Victoria made a decision. "Follow me." She led Jerome through the hallways to a smaller rehearsal room on the second floor. A baby grand piano sat in the corner. Victoria gestured to it. "Play something, right now. And it better be good, because if you're wasting my time, you're fired." Jerome approached the piano. His legs felt weak. His hands were trembling so badly he had to clench them into fists to make them stop. 28 years. It had been 28 years since he'd sat at a piano with the intention of playing. What if he'd forgotten? What if his hands didn't remember? What if this was a terrible mistake? He sat down on the bench. The seat felt familiar and foreign at the same time. He looked at the keys, 88 of them, black and white, the same as they'd always been. Jerome closed his eyes. He took 3 deep breaths. He let his hands hover over the keys, feeling the space between his fingers and the ivory, that tiny gap that separated silence from sound. Then he began to play. He chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, Major, Opus 9, No. 2. It was one of the most beautiful pieces ever written, and one of the first advanced pieces he'd learned as a teenager. His fingers found the opening notes, and it was like coming home after decades of being lost. The first few measures were tentative. His fingers felt stiff, unpracticed. But then something happened. Muscle memory took over. His hands remembered what his conscious mind had forgotten. The notes began to flow. And it wasn't just technical ability coming back. It was everything. The emotional understanding of the music. The way a phrase should breathe. The way silence between notes could be as important as the notes themselves. The way a piece should build and release tension and resolution, like a conversation between the pianist and the soul of the composer. Jerome played for 3 minutes. When he finished, he opened his eyes and looked at Victoria. She was standing frozen, her mouth slightly open, her professional composure completely shattered. "Oh my God," she whispered. You're actually... "I told you I could play," Jerome said quietly. Victoria pulled herself together, her executive brain kicking back into gear. Okay, this is happening. You're going to perform the second half of Preston's program. We have 15 minutes. Can you do Preston's repertoire?" Jerome thought about the pieces Preston had been scheduled to play. Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata 3rd Movement, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. "Yes," Jerome said. "I can play all of those." "Then we're doing this." Melissa Victoria called out as her assistant appeared in the doorway. "Get Jerome to wardrobe. Find him a tuxedo that fits. We have 10 minutes. Melissa looked confused. "Ms. Ashford, what?" "Just do it. Now, Jerome is performing the second half of the program." As Melissa led a stunned Jerome away, Victoria pulled out her phone and made one more call. "To the board chair." "We have a solution," she said. "Trust me." "What kind of solution?" the board chair asked warily. "An unconventional one. But I think it's going to work. It has to work." Victoria hung up and leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She'd just made possibly the biggest gamble of her professional career. She'd put the reputation of the Pembroke Arts Center in the hands of a janitor who hadn't played piano in nearly 3 decades. This was either going to be brilliant or career-ending, and she'd know which in about 20 minutes. The wardrobe room was in chaos. Melissa was frantically pulling tuxedos off racks, holding them up against Jerome, shaking her head, trying another one. "Arms up," she commanded. Jerome raised his arms. She pulled a jacket over his janitor's uniform, examined it critically, yanked it off. Too small. She tried another. Too big. Then another. Sleeves are too short. Jerome stood there like a mannequin, his mind spinning. What was he doing? What had he just agreed to? In less than 20 minutes, he was going to walk onto a stage in front of 800 wealthy, cultured people and play piano. Him. Jerome Walker. The janitor. His hands were shaking again. His breath was coming short and fast. This was panic. This was what panic felt like. Here, Melissa said, holding up another tuxedo. Try this one. Jerome mechanically put his arms through the sleeves. The jacket fit. The pants fit. Melissa was already grabbing a bow tie, helping him with the collar. Have you ever worn a tuxedo before? She asked, her tone slightly softer now. Once, Jerome said, for my high school graduation. Melissa paused in her tying of the bow tie and looked at him. Really looked at him. Are you okay? You look like you're about to pass out. I might, Jerome admitted. Ms. Ashford said you went to Juilliard. Is that true? I got accepted. I never actually went. But you can really play? She didn't just lose her mind in a moment of panic. Jerome met her eyes. I can play. I used to be good, really good. But that was a long time ago. Melissa finished with the bow tie and stepped back. Look at yourself. Jerome turned to the full-length mirror on the wall. The man looking back at him was a stranger. The tuxedo transformed him. He didn't look like a janitor anymore. He looked like a performer, like someone who belonged on that stage. But looks were deceiving. The tuxedo couldn't change what was underneath. He was still Jerome, still the man who'd spent 28 years cleaning floors and emptying trash bins. Still the man who'd buried his dreams so deep he'd thought they'd never surface again. Jerome. It was Raymond, the security guard, appearing in the doorway. I heard what's happening. Are you really doing this? I think so, Jerome said. I don't know. Raymond, what if I can't? What if I get out there and freeze? What if 28 years is too long and I embarrass myself and ruin everything? Raymond walked over and put a hand on Jerome's shoulder. Listen to me. I've known you for 3 years. You're the most reliable, honest person I've ever met. If you say you can do this, I believe you. But what if Jerry? You got a choice to make right now. You can walk away. Tell Victoria you changed your mind. Go back to mopping floors and living with that what if for the rest of your life. Or you can walk out on that stage and show all those people what you're really made of. I'm terrified. Good. That means it matters. You should be terrified. But don't let that fear make your choices for you. There was a knock on the door. Victoria appeared breathless. Jerome, we need to go. The audience is getting restless. It's time. Jerome looked at Raymond one more time. The old security guard nodded. You got this, brother. Jerome took a deep breath and followed Victoria out of the wardrobe room. As they walked through the hallways toward the main performance hall, Victoria spoke quickly. I'm going to introduce you as a last-minute replacement. I won't mention that you work here. I'll keep it vague. Most of the audience won't care about your background as long as you can play. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. The program is Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, then Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, third movement, then finish with Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. Can you handle that sequence? Jerome thought about those pieces. The Liszt was a technical fireworks display, full of impossible runs and jumps. The Beethoven was aggressive, powerful, unrelenting. The Rachmaninoff was dark, brooding, emotionally intense. It was an exhausting program. Preston would have been tired after playing it, and Preston was in top performing condition. Jerome hadn't played in 28 years. "I can do it," he said. They reached the backstage area. Victoria paused before going through the door to the stage. "Jerome, I'm trusting you. Do you understand how much I'm trusting you right now?" "Yes, ma'am. Don't make me regret it." Victoria walked onto the stage. Jerome could hear her voice through the door. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience during this extended intermission. As you may have heard, Preston Caldwell has been taken ill and unfortunately cannot continue tonight's performance. We know this is disappointing, but I'm pleased to announce that we have a replacement performer who has graciously agreed to step in on very short notice. Please welcome to the stage Jerome Walker." There was confused applause. Jerome could hear the murmurs, the questions. "Who? What is he famous? Why haven't we heard of him?" The stage door opened. Victoria gestured for Jerome to go through. This was it. This was the moment. The last chance to back out, to run, to retreat, to the safety of invisibility. Jerome thought about his mother, about Mrs. Henderson, about the kids who needed music programs, about the version of himself that had died 28 years ago when he gave up his dream. He thought about all the nights he'd stood in this building watching from the shadows, telling himself that this wasn't his world and never would be. And then he thought about what Raymond had said. Don't let fear make your choices. Jerome walked through the door and onto the stage. The stage lights hit Jerome like a physical force. For a moment, he couldn't see anything beyond the brightness. Then his eyes adjusted and he saw them. 800 people, sitting in perfect rows, all of them looking at him. The confusion was immediate and visible. Whispered conversations rippled through the audience. This wasn't a famous pianist. This was nobody they recognized. Where was Preston Caldwell? Who was this replacement? Why should they stay in their seats for some unknown performer? Jerome walked toward the piano, each step feeling like it took a lifetime. He was acutely aware of everything. The sound of his dress shoes on the stage floor, the way the tuxedo felt slightly too tight around his shoulders. The absolute silence from the audience, broken only by scattered whispers. As he got closer to the piano, Jerome heard a voice from the third row, not quite quiet enough. Wait, isn't that the janitor? The whisper spread. More people leaning to their neighbors. More recognition. Is he? No, it can't be. Yes, it is. That's the janitor, the man who cleans this place. Jerome reached the piano and stood beside it, his hand resting on the smooth, cool, ebony surface. He looked out at the audience, and for the first time in 28 years, he wasn't invisible. Every eye in the room was on him, and not in a good way. He could see the skepticism, the confusion, the barely concealed amusement on some faces. A few people were already getting up to leave, unwilling to waste their time on what they clearly thought was going to be an embarrassment. In the fifth row, a woman in a diamond necklace leaned to her husband and said just loud enough for Jerome to hear, "This is absurd. We paid $5,000 a ticket for this." Jerome's hands were shaking. His heart was racing so fast he thought it might burst. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to get off this stage, to go back to being invisible where it was safe. But he sat down at this piano bench. He adjusted the height, something he'd done 1,000 times in his youth, but hadn't done in nearly 3 decades. His hands hovered over the keys, and for one terrible moment he couldn't remember anything. Not the first note, not the fingering, not how to even begin. The silence in the hall was deafening. 800 people waiting. Some curious, most skeptical, a few already dismissive. And then from somewhere deep in his memory, he heard Mrs. Henderson's voice, the voice of his teacher, dead now for 15 years. but still alive in his mind. Jerome, she used to say, when you sit at a piano, you're not playing for the audience. You're playing for the music. You're having a conversation with the composer across time. Everything else is just noise. Jerome closed his eyes. He took a breath. He let everything else fall away, the judging eyes, the whispers, the fear, the doubt. And he began to play. The opening of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 is deceptively simple. A slow, almost melancholic introduction that seems gentle, almost folksy. But it's a trap. It's a calm before the storm that's coming. Jerome played those opening notes, and immediately he felt it. The connection between his fingers and the keys between his mind and the music between who he was and who he'd once been. It was still there. After 28 years, it was still there. The first section of the Rhapsody is all about building anticipation. It's a story being told, a journey being started. Jerome let the notes breathe. He didn't rush. He let each phrase speak before moving to the next. In the audience, the whispers died down. People who'd been about to leave settled back into their seats. Something was happening. This janitor, this nobody was actually playing, and he was playing well. Then came the transition, the moment where Liszt shifts from gentle introduction to technical showcase. The tempo increases, the difficulty skyrockets. Suddenly, it's not a simple melody anymore. It's a cascade of notes, impossibly fast, runs up and down the keyboard, jumps that require split-second precision passages that seem physically impossible to play. This is where most pianists stumble. Even professional pianists. This is where technical mastery is put to the absolute test. Jerome's hands flew across the keys. 28 years fell away. He was 19 again, practicing this piece for hours until his fingers ached until he could play it in his sleep. His hands remembered what his conscious mind had forgotten. The muscle memory was perfect intact, waiting all these years to be used again. The audience was leaning forward now. The skepticism was shifting to surprise. This wasn't just competent. This was extraordinary. This man was actually extraordinary. In the front row, Reginald Whitmore, the billionaire tech investor who'd donated $500,000 to the foundation, sat perfectly still. His eyes locked on Jerome. Reginald had been a classical music enthusiast for 40 years. He'd heard the greatest pianists in the world, and what he was hearing right now was something special. Victoria stood backstage, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She was witnessing something impossible. The janitor was good. No, not just good. He was brilliant. The gamble was paying off. Jerome reached the climax of the first major section, a cascade of octaves that rushed down the keyboard like a waterfall. His hands were moving so fast they were almost a blur. And then the sudden stop. The moment of silence before the next section begins. In that silence, someone in the audience gasped audibly. The middle section of the Rhapsody is different. It's lyrical, romantic, almost sentimental. It's the eye of the storm. Jerome played it with the tenderness that came from a place he'd kept locked away for decades. This wasn't just technical skill. This was emotion. Raw, honest, vulnerable emotion. People in the audience were crying. Actual tears. Not because the music was sad, but because it was so beautiful, so perfectly expressed, so utterly human. Jerome had forgotten this feeling. The feeling of connecting with an audience through music. The feeling of taking notes on a page and transforming them into something that touched the soul. He'd forgotten how much he needed this, how much a part of him this was. Then came the finale. The famous finale that everyone knows, even people who don't know classical music. The frenzied, joyful, impossible finale that's been used in cartoons and commercials and movies. Fast doesn't even describe it. It's beyond fast. It's a controlled explosion of notes. Jerome threw himself into it. His fingers hammered the keys. His whole body moved with the music. Sweat appeared on his forehead. His breath came in gasps. But he didn't miss a single note. Not one. The final chord crashed through the hall like thunder. Jerome's hands came down on the keys with all the force he had, and the sound filled every corner of the space. Silence. For 3 seconds, complete silence. And then the hall erupted. People jumped to their feet. Applause thundered through the space. Someone shouted "Bravo," then others joined. Bravo. Bravo. Jerome sat at the piano, his chest heaving, his hands trembling from exertion, and he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. He stood and turned to face the audience. They were all on their feet now, every single person applauding with an enthusiasm that bordered on frenzy. He saw Reginald Whitmore in the front row with tears streaming down his face. He saw Victoria backstage with her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and joy. He saw the woman who'd complained about the ticket prices now clapping harder than anyone, her expensive jewelry glittering under the lights. Jerome bowed. The applause continued. He bowed again. It didn't stop. Finally, mercifully, the applause began to fade. People sat down. Jerome sat back at the piano. He had 2 more pieces to play, the Beethoven and the Rachmaninoff. But something had changed. He wasn't terrified anymore. He wasn't doubting himself. The connection had been made. The audience was with him now. They were ready to go wherever he took them. Jerome placed his hands on the keys and prepared for the Moonlight Sonata 3rd movement. This piece was completely different from the Liszt. Where the Liszt was flashy and joyful, the Beethoven was dark, aggressive, almost violent. It's one of the most technically demanding pieces Beethoven ever wrote, a whirlwind of perpetual motion that doesn't let up for 3.5 minutes. He began. The Moonlight Sonata's 3rd movement is relentless. From the first note to the last, there's no break, no moment to catch your breath. It's a technical and physical challenge that pushes even the best pianists to their limits. Jerome played it with a ferocity that surprised even him. All the frustration, all the lost years, all the suppressed anger at the life he'd had to live, instead of the life he'd dreamed of it all, came out through his fingers. This wasn't just music. This was catharsis. The audience felt it. They felt the pain, the passion, the decades of longing compressed into 3.5 minutes of pure intensity. This wasn't a performance. This was a man's soul laid bare. When the final notes crashed and faded, the silence lasted even longer this time. The applause, when it came, was different. It wasn't just appreciation for technical skill. It was recognition of something deeper, something real. Jerome didn't stand this time. He went straight into the Rachmaninoff, the prelude in C-sharp minor, one of the most famous pieces in the classical repertoire, known for its haunting opening bells and its overwhelming emotional weight. This was the piece Jerome had loved most when he was young. The piece he'd been working on perfecting when his mother got sick. The piece he'd played in his mind 1,000 times over the past 28 years, but never allowed himself to play with his hands. Now, he was playing it. For real. In front of 800 people. and he was playing it for every dream he'd buried, for every moment of doubt, for every time he'd told himself that his life was okay, when it wasn't for his mother who'd sacrificed everything for Mrs. Henderson, who'd believed in him. The music poured out of him like water breaking through a dam, the famous opening chords deep and resonant like church bells, the climbing melody that builds and builds and builds, the explosive middle section, the quiet, almost resigned ending. By the time Jerome played the final notes, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Victoria was openly crying backstage. Reginald Whitmore had his head in his hands. The woman with the diamond necklace was sobbing into her husband's shoulder. The final chord faded into silence. This time the silence lasted for 5 full seconds, and then the hall exploded with applause louder than before. People weren't just standing, they were shouting, crying, embracing each other. It wasn't just appreciation, it was collective catharsis. Jerome's performance had touched something universal in all of them. The applause went on for 5 minutes. Jerome stood at the piano, overwhelmed, not sure what to do with his hands, not sure where to look. He bowed again and again, but the applause didn't stop. Finally, Victoria walked onto the stage. She had tears running down her face, her makeup smeared, her professional composure completely gone. She walked straight to Jerome and hugged him right there on stage in front of everyone. "Thank you," she whispered in his ear. "Thank you." When Victoria released him and stepped back, she picked up the microphone that had been set aside earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "I think we can all agree that what we just witnessed was extraordinary. Jerome Walker is not a household name. He's not a touring professional. In fact, until 2 hours ago, Jerome was working here at the Pembroke as a member of our custodial staff." Gasps rippled through the audience. The revelation hit like a shockwave. But 28 years ago, Victoria continued. Jerome was accepted to Juilliard on a full scholarship. He gave up that opportunity to care for his sick mother. He hasn't played piano publicly in almost 3 decades. Tonight, faced with an emergency, he volunteered to help. And what you just heard was a man who sacrificed his dream for his family, finally getting a chance to share his gift with the world. The applause started again, even louder than before. But this time it was different. This time it wasn't just for the performance, it was for the man, for his sacrifice, for his courage, for the fact that he'd stepped onto that stage despite the fear, despite the risk, despite 28 years of silence. Jerome stood there, tears streaming down his face, and for the first time in 28 years, he felt seen, really seen. Not as a janitor, not as someone invisible, but as a whole person, as someone whose life and choices mattered, as someone whose gift was real and valuable and worth sharing. Reginald Whitmore stood up from his seat in the front row and walked toward the stage. His security team looked alarmed, but Reginald waved them off. He climbed the steps to the stage and approached Jerome. Son Reginald said, his voice thick with emotion, "That was the most moving performance I've heard in 40 years of attending concerts. I've seen the greatest pianists in the world, and what you did tonight transcends technical mastery. You touched the divine." He pulled out his phone and made a call right there on stage in front of everyone. "Arthur, it's Reginald. I need you to clear my schedule tomorrow. I want to set up a meeting with the New York Philharmonic. Yes, tomorrow. I've just heard someone they need to know about. His name is Jerome Walker, and you're going to want to hear him play." The audience erupted again. People were pulling out their phones, making calls, already working to turn this moment into something more than just a one-night miracle. Victoria leaned into the microphone again. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we adjourn to the reception, I want to remind you why we're here tonight. We're raising money for arts education programs in underfunded schools. Programs that help talented kids from challenging circumstances get access to training and opportunities they couldn't otherwise afford. Kids like Jerome was. Your donations don't just fund programs, they change lives. She paused, then smiled. The original fundraising goal for tonight was $5 million. I'm pleased to announce that we've already exceeded that. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to your generosity, and inspired by what we've all witnessed tonight, we have raised $8.2 million for arts education. The room erupted once more. 8.2 million. They'd nearly doubled the goal, but Reginald wasn't done. He took the microphone from Victoria. I'd like to make one more announcement. Effective immediately, I'm establishing the Jerome Walker Scholarship Fund with an initial endowment of $1 million. This fund will provide full scholarships to talented young musicians from low-income families, ensuring that no child has to choose between their dreams and their family's survival. Because Jerome made that choice once, no one should have to make it again. The applause was deafening. Jerome couldn't process it. Any of it. An hour ago, he'd been a janitor cleaning floors. Now he was standing on stage while a billionaire established a scholarship fund in his name. It was too much. It was overwhelming. But it was also the most real thing he'd felt in 28 years. The reception after the performance was unlike anything Jerome had ever experienced. People who wouldn't have noticed him if he'd been cleaning their table now lined up to talk to him, to shake his hand, to tell him how his performance had moved them. A woman in her 60s approached, her eyes still red from crying. My son gave up music to go into finance because it was practical. After hearing you tonight, I called him. He's going to start taking lessons again. Thank you for reminding us that some things are worth holding on to. A young man couldn't have been more than 25, waited patiently for his turn. I'm a first-year Jules Juilliard student, he said. I've been struggling thinking maybe I'm not good enough, maybe I should quit. But after hearing you tonight, after hearing your story, I'm not giving up. If you could come back after 28 years and play like that, I can push through one difficult year. One after another, people shared how the performance had affected them. Jerome stood there in the tuxedo that still felt foreign, trying to absorb it all, trying to understand how his life had changed completely in the span of 2 hours. Preston Caldwell appeared looking pale, but recovered enough to attend the reception. He walked straight to Jerome, and for a moment Jerome braced himself for anger or resentment. Instead, Preston extended his hand. I'm embarrassed, Preston said. I've spent my career thinking I was among the best, that my training and experience made me elite. And then I hear you, someone who hasn't played in decades, and you reminded me what music is actually about. It's not about technical perfection. It's about truth. You played with more truth in one night than I've played in my entire career. Jerome shook his hand. You're very kind. But you're an incredible pianist. I'm a very good technician, Preston said. You're an artist. There's a difference. He paused. I heard about the scholarship fund. That's remarkable. I'd like to contribute as well. Another $100,000 if you'll accept it. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep playing. Say you won't let another day go by without sharing this gift. The world needs what you have. Victoria appeared at Jerome's elbow. Jerome, there are some people from Lincoln Center who want to talk to you about performing there, and someone from Sony Classical about a recording contract, and about 10 different managers who want to represent you. This is all happening very fast, and I want to make sure you're comfortable with it. Jerome looked around the room. At all these people, these wealthy, powerful, influential people who suddenly saw him, who suddenly valued him. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. Ms. Ashford, Jerome said, I need to ask you something. Am I still employed here? As a janitor, Victoria looked surprised by the question. Jerome, after tonight, you can be whatever you want to be. But no, I don't think you'll be cleaning floors anymore. Then I need to give my 2 weeks' notice properly, and I need to make sure Raymond gets my shift covered. I can't just leave him short-staffed." Victoria smiled a real smile this time, not her professional one. "That's why you played with such truth tonight, because you're still the same person you were this morning. Success hasn't changed who you are." "I don't know about success," Jerome said. "This all still feels like a dream. Tomorrow I'm going to wake up, and this will all have been my imagination." "It's real," Victoria said. "And Jerome, I owe you an apology. I've worked here for 8 years, and I never once asked you about your life, your story, who you were beyond your job. I saw your uniform instead of seeing you. I'm sorry for that." "You weren't unkind," Jerome said. "I wasn't kind either. And that's not good enough. You deserved better." Reginald Whitmore appeared with 2 other people, a man and a woman in expensive suits. "Jerome, this is Arthur Chen from the New York Philharmonic, and Susan Rodriguez from the Aspen Music Festival. They'd both like to talk to you about performance opportunities." The conversations blurred together after that. Dates, venues, repertoire, contracts, lawyers, managers, publicity. Jerome's head was spinning. He excused himself and found his way to a quiet hallway, needing a moment to breathe. Raymond found him there. The old security guard had tears in his eyes. "I knew you could do it. I knew it. Raymond, this is insane. 2 hours ago, I was a janitor. Now they're talking about recording contracts and concert tours. How is this my life? Because you're finally living the life you were meant to live. The life that got interrupted but never disappeared. Jerry, I've known you for 3 years, and this is the first time I've seen you actually alive. Not just existing, actually alive. I'm scared," Jerome admitted. "What if this is just one night? What if I can't sustain it? What if—" "Stop," Raymond said. "You can't live your life in what-ifs. You got a second chance. How many people get that? You take this gift and you run with it. And when you're playing Carnegie Hall or wherever they send you, you remember the kids you're helping. You remember why this matters." Jerome nodded. Raymond was right. This wasn't just about him anymore. The scholarship fund, the inspiration he'd apparently provided to others, the reminder that dreams deferred weren't necessarily dreams destroyed, it was bigger than one man's redemption story. "You coming back inside?" Raymond asked. "People want to talk to you. Give me 1 more minute." Raymond clapped him on the shoulder and headed back to the reception. Jerome stood in the quiet hallway and thought about his mother. She was in her care facility now, probably asleep. But tomorrow he would visit her and tell her everything that had happened. Tell her that the sacrifice she'd made, the son who'd given up Juilliard to care for her, had finally gotten his chance. She would cry. She would probably feel guilty, even though she had nothing to feel guilty about. But she would also be proud. And she would finally see that her son's gift hadn't been wasted. Jerome took a deep breath and walked back into the reception, back into his new life. The reception continued for another hour, but eventually the guests began to leave. They departed in their town cars and limousines, still talking about the performance, still processing what they'd witnessed. Victoria found Jerome near the end of the evening. "I've been fielding calls and emails non-stop. The story is already spreading. Someone recorded part of your performance on their phone and posted it online. It's going viral. You have 300,000 views already." Jerome blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means your anonymity is over. By tomorrow morning, everyone is going to know who you are. The press will want interviews. There will be photographers. Your life is about to become very public very quickly. Are you prepared for that?" "Oh," Jerome said honestly. "I'm not prepared for any of this. I've taken the liberty of contacting someone who can help. Her name is Patricia Holmes. She's a manager who represents several prominent classical musicians. She's ethical, experienced, and won't take advantage of you. She'd like to meet with you tomorrow if you're interested." "Why are you doing this?" Jerome asked. "Helping me, I mean." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Because I was wrong about you. Because I've spent years treating people like you as invisible, and you weren't invisible. I just wasn't looking. And because what happened tonight is important, not just for you, but for what it represents. Talent exists everywhere. Genius exists everywhere. But opportunity doesn't. You remind people of that. And I want to make sure you get the support you need to make the most of this second chance." "Thank you," Jerome said, "for trusting me tonight, for giving me the opportunity." "You saved the gala," Victoria said. "You raised more money than we've ever raised. You gave people an experience they'll remember for the rest of their lives. I should be thanking you." By midnight, the Pembroke Arts Center was empty, except for the cleanup crew and security. Jerome had changed out of the tuxedo and back into his regular clothes. He stood in the main performance hall, looking at the piano one more time. 28 years. 28 years he'd stayed away from this. And in one night, everything had changed. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Reginald Whitmore. I hope you don't mind that Victoria gave me your number. I meant what I said tonight. Your playing was transcendent. I've arranged a meeting for you next week with some people I think you should meet. We'll be in touch. And Jerome, welcome back to the world. We've been waiting for you." Jerome sat down on the edge of the stage, his legs suddenly weak. His phone buzzed again. Another message from another unknown number. Then another. Then another. Reporters, music industry people, festival organizers. His life was never going to be the same. Raymond appeared from the hallway. "Your shift is over, Jerry. Way over. You should go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." "Raymond, I don't know how to do this. Any of this. I know how to clean floors. I know how to empty trash. I don't know how to be whoever they think I am now. You don't have to be anyone except who you already are. That's what made tonight special. You were authentic. You were real. Stay that way, and you'll be fine." Jerome stood up. "I need to visit my mother tomorrow, before all the craziness starts." "Good man. She should hear it from you first." Jerome walked toward the exit, then paused and turned back. "Raymond, I'm still going to work my shifts until I officially transition out. I'm not leaving you guys hanging." Raymond laughed. "Jerry, you just performed for 800 people and raised $8 million. I think we can cover your shifts. Still, I'm not that person who just bails. I'll work through next week at least until they find someone to replace me. You're something else, you know, that most people would have already forgotten about us. You're my friend. You believed in me when nobody else did. I don't forget that." Jerome left through the service entrance the same way he'd entered thousands of times before. But this time, as he walked out into the New York night, he was different. The world was different. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The messages kept coming. Tomorrow, he'd have to figure out how to navigate all of this. Tomorrow, he'd have to become whatever it was people expected him to be. But tonight, he was just Jerome. A man who'd played piano after 28 years of silence. A man who'd been seen. A man who'd been heard. And that was enough. Jerome woke up at 6 a.m., as he always did. And for a moment he thought it had all been a dream. Then he saw the tuxedo hanging on the back of his bedroom door, and it all came rushing back. His phone screen showed 127 missed calls and 286 unread text messages. Jerome set the phone down without looking at any of them. First, he needed to visit his mother. The Sunrise Care Facility was a 40-minute subway ride from his apartment. Jerome had made this trip 3 times a week for the past 12 years, ever since his mother's condition had deteriorated to the point where he could no longer care for her at home. He signed in at the reception desk. The woman behind the desk, Gloria, who'd seen him countless times, smiled warmly. "Morning, Jerome. Your mom's having a good day today. She's been asking about you." Jerome walked down the familiar hallways to room 237. His mother, Patricia Walker, was 71 years old now. The stroke had been 18 years ago, but she'd had 2 more since then, each one taking a little more of her mobility, a little more of her independence. But her mind was still sharp. That's what made it harder in some ways. She was trapped in a body that didn't work anymore, but she was still completely aware of everything. She was sitting in her wheelchair by the window when Jerome entered. Her face lit up when she saw him. "Baby boy." She said her speech slightly slurred, but understandable. "You're here early. Is everything okay?" Jerome pulled up a chair next to her. "Mom, something happened last night. Something big. What kind of something? I played piano, Mom. For the first time in 28 years. At the Pembroke in front of 800 people. His mother's eyes widened. What? How Jerome told her everything. The emergency with Preston Caldwell, his decision to volunteer, the fear, the performance, the standing ovation, the scholarship fund, the recording contract offers. All of it. By the end, his mother was crying. Jerome. Jerome. Oh my God. After all these years. After everything you gave up, I didn't give up anything, Mom. I made a choice. I chose you. And I'd make that same choice again. But you lost so much. Your dream, your future. I got my future last night. 28 years later. But I got it. And Mom, none of it would have been possible without you. Without everything you did for me when I was young. Without the sacrifices you made so I could take piano lessons. This isn't my redemption story. It's ours." His mother reached out with her shaking hand and touched his face. "I'm so proud of you. I've always been proud of you, even when you were cleaning floors. But this, Jerome, this is what you were meant to do. There's more," Jerome said. "A billionaire named Reginald Whitmore established a scholarship fund in my name. $1 million to help kids like I was, kids who have talent but no money. Mom, we're going to help so many kids get the chances they deserve." She was openly sobbing now, the kind of crying that comes from 28 years of guilt finally being released. "You should have left me. You should have gone to New York. Stop. Don't ever say that. You're my mother. You gave me everything. I could never have lived with myself if I'd abandoned you." They sat together for a long time, his mother crying, Jerome holding her hand, both of them processing the impossible turn their lives had taken. Finally, his mother wiped her eyes and asked, "What happens now?" "I don't know," Jerome admitted. "I have meetings set up with managers and concert halls and record labels. There's talk of a tour. It's all happening so fast. Will you still visit me, Mom? I'll visit you every week, no matter where I am or how famous I get. You're the reason for all of this. I'm not forgetting that. I want to hear you play," she said suddenly. "In person. Not on a recording. I want to be in the audience when you perform." Jerome thought about the logistics. Getting his mother out of the care facility, transported to a venue managing her wheelchair and her needs. It would be complicated. "I'll make it happen," he promised. "I don't care what it takes. You'll be there for my next big performance. Front row." His phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again. And again. "You should probably answer that," his mother said. Jerome checked the screen. "Victoria Ashford," he answered. "Jerome, where are you? You have reporters camped outside your apartment building. The story is everywhere. CNN, The New York Times. Everyone wants to interview you. Patricia Holmes, the manager I mentioned, is trying to reach you. You need to call her back." "I'm with my mother," Jerome said. "Oh, of course. I'm sorry to interrupt. But Jerome, this is moving fast. You need representation. You need someone to handle the media and the offers coming in. Patricia is trustworthy. Call her. Please, I will, Jerome said. After I finish visiting with my mom. He hung up and turned off his phone. You should go, his mother said. You have important things to deal with. Nothing's more important than this, Jerome said. They can wait. They talked for another hour. Not about the performance or the future, but about small things. The weather, the food at the care facility. A funny thing that happened with one of the nurses. Normal things. The kind of conversation they'd been having for years. Because beneath everything that had changed, some things remained the same. He was still her son. She was still his mother. And that mattered more than any amount of fame or fortune. When Jerome finally left the care facility, he turned his phone back on and was immediately overwhelmed by notifications. He found Patricia Holmes's number in the messages and called her back. Mr. Walker, Patricia said. Her voice was professional but warm. I've been trying to reach you. We need to meet today, as soon as possible. The interest in you is unprecedented. We need to manage this carefully. Ms. Holmes. I appreciate the help, but I need to be clear about something. This isn't about fame or money for me. This is about music and about helping kids who need opportunities. I understand that. That's exactly why you need good representation. To make sure the opportunities you get align with your values. To make sure you don't get taken advantage of. To make sure your story is told accurately. Okay, Jerome said. Where should we meet? Patricia Holmes' office was in Midtown Manhattan, in one of those buildings where the elevator required a key card and the lobby had marble floors. Jerome felt out of place in his regular clothes, surrounded by business people in suits. Patricia's office was on the 32nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She was in her 50s, with gray hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than Jerome's monthly rent. But her handshake was firm, and her smile was genuine. Jerome, it's an honor to meet you. I watched the video that's circulating online. What you did last night was extraordinary. Thank you. Let me cut to the chase. I represent 15 classical musicians, including 2 of the most successful concert pianists in the country. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I can tell you that what's happening to you right now is rare. The combination of your talent and your story has captured people's imagination. But it can go wrong very quickly if it's not managed properly. What do you mean? Patricia pulled up her tablet and showed Jerome a series of headlines. Janitor to concert pianist overnight. Hidden genius discovered after 28 years. The pianist who cleaned toilets. These are from major publications. You're a story, a feel-good story, and that's powerful, but it can also be reductive. You're not just a janitor who happens to play piano. You're a serious artist. We need to make sure you're treated as such. How do we do that? By being strategic about which opportunities you take. By making sure your first major performances are at venues and with organizations that reinforce your credibility as an artist, not as a curiosity. By controlling your narrative instead of letting others define it for you. She pulled up a list on her screen. In the past 18 hours, you've received offers from 14 different venues, 6 recording companies, 3 television shows, and a major streaming service that wants to do a documentary about you. We need to sort through all of this and decide what serves your long-term career. I don't even know what I want my long-term career to be, Jerome admitted. 24 hours ago, I was a janitor. I haven't had time to think about the future. That's okay. That's what I'm here for. But I need to know what matters to you. What are your non-negotiables? Jerome thought for a moment. The scholarship fund. That's non-negotiable. Whatever I do, it has to support that mission, helping kids from poor families get access to music education. Good. What else? I don't want to be a gimmick. I don't want to be the janitor pianist. I want to be a pianist. Period. Excellent. That's important. Anything else, I need to be able to visit my mother regularly. Whatever schedule we set up, that time is sacred. Patricia made notes. Understood. Here's what I propose. We turn down the television shows and the documentary for now. Those can wait. We focus on building your performing career with prestigious venues. Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, the Kennedy Center. Places that establish you as a serious artist. Won't those places think I'm not ready? I just performed for the first time in decades. They've already reached out. Carnegie Hall wants to book you for a recital in 6 months. That gives you time to prepare to practice to build a repertoire. Lincoln Center wants you to perform with the New York Philharmonic in 8 months. These are not small opportunities, Jerome. These are career-making performances. Jerome's head was spinning. Carnegie Hall. 6 months. Could he do it? Could he really step back into this world at that level? I need to think about it, he said. Of course. But Jerome, I need an answer within 24 hours. These opportunities won't wait. The interest in you is at its peak right now. We need to capitalize on it while we can. What about the recording contract I have calls scheduled this afternoon with Sony Classical, Deutsche Grammophon, and Decca? All major labels. They're talking about an album of solo repertoire released in coordination with your Carnegie Hall debut. It's a package deal that could establish you as a major artist. How much money are we talking about? Patricia hesitated. The recording advances being discussed are in the range of $200,000 to $300,000. Performance fees for venues like Carnegie Hall are typically $25,000 to $50,000 per performance. If you do 10 to 12 major performances over the next year, plus the recording, you're looking at somewhere between $600,000 and $1 million in income. Jerome sat back in his chair. $1 million. He currently made $27,000 a year as a janitor. That's life-changing money, he said quietly. Yes, but Jerome, I need you to understand something. This level of success comes with pressure, expectations, scrutiny. Your private life won't be private anymore. People will want pieces of you, your time, your story, your energy. You need to be prepared for that. I don't know if I am. That's honest. But here's what I've learned in 30 years of doing this. The artists who survive and thrive are the ones who stay grounded, who remember why they do this, who don't let the fame and money change who they are fundamentally. From what Victoria told me about you, and from what I've observed in this meeting, I think you're that kind of person. Jerome stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere in that sprawl of buildings was his tiny apartment, his mother's care facility, the Pembroke Arts Center, where he'd worked for 5 years. His old life was still down there. But up here, 32 floors above it, his new life was being designed, planned, packaged for public consumption. What if I fail? Jerome asked. What if I can't live up to the expectations? What if last night was a fluke? It wasn't a fluke. I've seen the video. I've read the reviews from people who were there. You're the real thing, Jerome. But even real talent needs work, practice, discipline. That's why the 6-month timeline for Carnegie Hall is smart. It gives you time to prepare properly. Jerome turned back to Patricia. If I do this, if I hire you and accept these opportunities, I need to know that I'm in control of my own career. I'm not going to be pushed into things that don't feel right. That's exactly how it should work. I advise you decide. Always. Okay, Jerome said. I'll think about it tonight and call you tomorrow. That's all I ask. And Jerome, for what it's worth, I hope you say yes. The classical music world needs someone like you. Someone who reminds people why music matters. As Jerome left Patricia's office and rode the elevator back down to ground level, he felt the weight of the decision ahead of him. This was the moment, the point of no return. If he said yes to Patricia, yes to Carnegie Hall, yes to this new life, There was no going back to invisibility. But did he even want to go back? Jerome spent the rest of the day in a coffee shop in Queens, far from Manhattan where nobody recognized him. He needed time to think away from the messages and the calls and the pressure. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the messages he'd been ignoring. There were hundreds of them. Reporters requesting interviews, music industry people offering opportunities. Old acquaintances he hadn't heard from in decades suddenly getting in touch. But there was one message that stood out. From a number with a Baltimore area code. "Jerome, this is David Henderson. You probably don't remember me. I'm Patricia Henderson's son. My mom passed away 15 years ago, but she never stopped talking about you. She always said you were the most talented student she ever taught. She would have been so proud of you last night. I know she's proud of you now wherever she is. Congratulations. You deserve this." Jerome felt tears pricking his eyes. Mrs. Henderson, the teacher who'd believed in him when nobody else did. The woman who'd given him free lessons for 6 years because she saw something in a poor kid from a rough neighborhood. He typed out a response. "Thank you for reaching out. Your mother changed my life. Everything I am as a musician I owe to her. I'm going to dedicate my Carnegie Hall performance to her memory." He hit send, then stared at his own words. Carnegie Hall performance. He'd written it as if it was already decided, as if he was already committed to this new path. Maybe he was. Jerome thought about the alternatives. He could say no to all of it. He could go back to the Pembroke, back to cleaning floors, back to the safety of invisibility. Nobody would blame him. It would be understandable to be overwhelmed to retreat. But then what? Would he spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been? Would he look back at this moment when he's 60, 70, 80 years old and regret not taking the chance? He thought about the kids the scholarship fund would help. Kids just like him with talent and dreams, but no resources. If he became successful, truly successful, he could raise more money for that fund. He could help hundreds, maybe thousands of kids over the years. This wasn't just about him. It never was. Jerome pulled out his phone and called Patricia Holmes. "Jerome," she answered on the first ring. "I'm in," he said. "Let's do this. All of it. Carnegie Hall, the recording, everything." He could hear Patricia's smile through the phone. "That's wonderful news. We're going to do great things together, Jerome. I promise you that." "There's one condition," Jerome said. "Name it. My first major performance, the Carnegie Hall recital, I want to make it a benefit concert. Ticket proceeds go to the scholarship fund. I don't care if that's not how it's usually done. That's how I want it done." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "That's going to be complicated. Carnegie Hall has their own procedures, their own charitable programs. But Jerome, if that's what you want, I'll make it happen. It's what I want." "Then consider it done. I'll start making calls today. We'll need to get you working with a coach to prepare your repertoire. We'll need publicity photos, program notes, press materials. There's a lot to do in 6 months. I'm ready." After he hung up, Jerome sat in the coffee shop for a while longer, letting the decision settle. He'd done it. He'd committed. There was no backing out now. His phone buzzed. A text from Raymond. "Saw you on the news, Jerry. You're famous now. Don't forget about us little people. But seriously, I'm proud of you. You deserve every bit of this." Jerome smiled and texted back. "Could never forget you, Raymond. You're the reason I had the courage to step forward. Thank you for believing in me." Another text came in this time from Victoria. "Jerome, I just heard from Patricia that you're moving forward with Carnegie Hall. I'm so happy for you. And I wanted you to know that the board has approved my proposal to rename our main performance hall the Jerome Walker Performing Arts Hall. It seems fitting given that you saved our biggest fundraiser and reminded us all why this place exists in the first place." Jerome stared at the text. They were naming the hall after him. The hall where he'd worked as a janitor, where he'd cleaned floors and emptied trash and been invisible for 5 years. Now it would bear his name. It was too much. All of it was too much. But it was also exactly right. Jerome left the coffee shop and started walking. He didn't have a destination in mind. He just needed to move to process, to let his body catch up with the reality his brain was still struggling to accept. He found himself walking toward the river to a small park with a view of the Manhattan skyline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The city lights were starting to come on one by one, transforming the skyline into something magical. Jerome sat on a bench and watched the city he'd lived in for 5 years, but never felt part of. The city that had always seemed like it belonged to other people. Successful people. Important people. Not janitors. Not nobodies. But maybe he wasn't a nobody. Maybe he never had been. Maybe visibility wasn't the same thing as value, and all those years he'd been invisible, he'd still mattered. He'd just been the only one who couldn't see it. His phone rang one more time. A number he didn't recognize, but this time he answered. "Is this Jerome Walker?" A woman's voice, young, hesitant. "Yes." "Mr. Walker, my name is Sofia Martinez. I'm a 17-year-old piano student in the Bronx. I saw the video of your performance, and I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for what? For showing me that it's possible. I'm the only kid in my school who plays classical music. Everyone thinks it's weird. My family thinks I should focus on something more practical. I was actually thinking about quitting. But then I saw you, and I heard your story, and I realized that if you could wait 28 years and still come back, I can keep going for a few more years until I get to college." Jerome felt his throat tighten. "Sophia, don't quit. The world needs your music. And hey, look up the Jerome Walker Scholarship Fund. When you're ready for college, apply for it. That's what it's there for. For talented kids who need help." "Really? You'd help me?" "That's literally why the fund exists. That's the whole point of everything that happened last night." Sophia was crying now. "Thank you, Mr. Walker. Thank you so much." After they hung up, Jerome sat on the bench as darkness fell completely and the city lights blazed. He thought about Sophia, about all the kids like her, about how his one performance had rippled out and touched lives he'd never know about. This was what Mrs. Henderson had tried to teach him all those years ago. Music wasn't just about the notes or the technique or the performance. It was about connection. It was about reminding people of their own humanity, their own potential, their own dreams. And if Jerome could do that, if he could use this impossible second chance to connect with people and help kids like Sophia, then every bit of the fear and uncertainty was worth it. He stood up from the bench and started walking back toward the subway. Tomorrow, he'd start preparing. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, he'd start the journey toward Carnegie Hall and whatever came after. But tonight, he was just Jerome Walker, a man who'd cleaned floors and played piano, a man who'd been invisible and was now seen, a man who'd given up his dream and found it again 28 years later. And that was enough. 6 months passed in a blur of preparation. Jerome worked with a coach 5 days a week, rebuilding his technique, expanding his repertoire, preparing for the most important performance of his life. He quit his job at the Pembroke, though he visited occasionally to say hello to Raymond and the other staff members who'd been part of his old life. Victoria had indeed renamed the main hall, and there was now a brass plaque outside it that read Jerome Walker Performing Arts Hall. Every time Jerome saw it, he felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. The scholarship fund had grown to $3 million, with donations continuing to come in. They'd already awarded 15 full scholarships to talented young musicians from low-income families. Sofia Martinez had been the first recipient. Jerome's mother's health had stabilized. She'd moved to a nicer care facility, one that Jerome could now afford to pay for out of pocket. She was excited about attending his Carnegie Hall debut, and Jerome had made arrangements for medical transport and front-row wheelchair accessibility. The media attention had been intense, but manageable thanks to Patricia's expert guidance. Jerome had done select interviews with major publications, all focused on his music and his mission to help young musicians rather than on the janitor to pianist novelty angle. And now, finally, it was the night of his Carnegie Hall debut. Jerome stood backstage wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo that actually fit, looking out at the sold-out hall. 2,800 people, every seat filled. People had paid hundreds of dollars per ticket, with all proceeds going to the scholarship fund. In the front row, in a special wheelchair-accessible spot, was his mother, tears already streaming down her face. Next to her was Raymond, in his best suit. And scattered throughout the hall were Victoria, Reginald, Whitmore, Preston Caldwell, and so many others who'd been part of his journey. Patricia appeared at his elbow. 5 minutes. "How are you feeling?" Terrified, Jerome admitted. "Good. Channel that into the performance. You've prepared for this. You're ready. What if I'm not as good as everyone remembers? What if the magic was just that one night, then you'll still be playing Carnegie Hall, which is more than most pianists ever achieve. But Jerome, you are that good. I've heard you practice. You're better now than you were 6 months ago. Trust yourself." A stage manager appeared. "Mr. Walker, we're ready for you. This was it, the moment. No more preparation, no more practice, no more what-ifs." Jerome walked toward the stage entrance, his heart pounding. As he reached the door, Patricia called out, "Remember Mrs. Henderson? Remember Sophia? Remember why you're doing this?" Jerome nodded and walked through the door. The applause was immediate and thunderous. People stood as he walked onto the stage, a standing ovation before he'd even played a single note. This was different from the Pembroke Gala. These people knew who he was. They'd come specifically to hear him. Their expectations were enormous. Jerome reached the piano and stood beside it, acknowledging the applause with bows. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the golden tiers of Carnegie Hall, at the history embedded in every surface of this legendary venue. Every great pianist had played here. Horowitz Rubinstein, Argerich Zimmerman, and now somehow impossibly Jerome Walker. The applause finally faded. Jerome sat at the piano. He'd chosen his program carefully, working with his coach to create a narrative arc across the recital. He was opening with Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto number, to the same piece he'd planned to perform for his Juilliard audition 28 years ago. This was his way of completing the circle, of fulfilling the promise he'd made to himself all those years ago. Jerome's hands hovered over the keys. He took a breath, and then he began to play. The opening chords of the Rachmaninoff Second Concerto are some of the most famous in classical music. Deep, resonant, powerful. They announce that something important is about to happen. Jerome played them with authority he'd earned through 6 months of intensive practice and 28 years of lived experience. This wasn't a 19-year-old prodigy playing anymore. This was a man who'd suffered, sacrificed, survived, and found his way back. All of that was in the notes. The first movement of the concerto is a dialogue between power and tenderness, between the thunderous tutti sections, where the piano and orchestra clash in glorious chaos, and the intimate moments where the piano speaks alone, vulnerable and honest. Without an orchestra, Jerome had to make the piano tell the whole story. His coach had helped him arrange the reduction, capturing the essence of the orchestral parts while maintaining the solo piano line. It worked. The audience heard not just a piano, but an entire symphony. Jerome's technique, rebuilt and refined over 6 months, was flawless. But more importantly, his emotional interpretation was devastating. Every phrase meant something. Every dynamic shift told part of the story. The first movement built to its triumphant conclusion, Jerome's hands attacking the keys with controlled fury, and when he hit the final chords, the audience erupted. But Jerome didn't pause. He moved immediately into the second movement. The second movement is where the Rachmaninoff reveals its soul. It's one of the most beautiful melodies ever written, achingly romantic, impossibly tender. Jerome played it thinking about his mother, about the sacrifices she'd made, about the love that had sustained both of them through the hardest years. People in the audience were crying openly now. This wasn't just music. This was confession. This was testimony. This was a man pouring his entire life into 88 keys. The third movement is pure joy, pure celebration. It's Rachmaninoff saying, "After all the darkness, after all the struggle, there is light, there is triumph, there is hope." Jerome played it with abandon, his whole body moving with the music, sweat appearing on his forehead, his fingers flying across the keys with precision that seemed impossible. The final chord crashed through the hall like thunder. Jerome's hands came down with all his strength, and the sound reverberated through Carnegie Hall's perfect acoustics. Silence. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Then chaos. The audience exploded. People jumped to their feet, screaming, crying, applauding so loud it was almost painful. The ovation went on for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of uninterrupted applause at Carnegie Hall. It was unprecedented for a debut recital. Jerome stood, bowed deeply, sat back down. The applause finally faded enough for him to continue. He had 3 more pieces to play. Chopin's Ballad. Number 1. Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata, and closing with Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, arranged for solo piano. But he knew, and everyone in that hall knew, that the Rachmaninoff had been the moment. That was the performance that would be remembered, talked about, written about. That was the moment when Jerome Walker announced to the world that he wasn't a curiosity or a feel-good story. He was a great artist. Everything else would be epilogue. But Jerome wasn't done yet. He'd poured everything into the Rachmaninoff, but he had more to give. The night was far from over. He launched into Chopin's Ballade number. One without preamble, without giving the audience time to fully settle. This piece was different from the Rachmaninoff. Where the Rachmaninoff was about grand emotions and sweeping drama, the Chopin was more intimate, more personal. It was like the difference between giving a speech to thousands and having a quiet conversation with one person. Jerome played the ballad with the wisdom of his years. When he was younger, preparing for Juilliard, he'd played this piece with technical brilliance, but without full understanding. Now, at 47, having lived a full life with all its disappointments and small victories, he understood what Chopin was saying. The ballade tells a story. It's literally musical storytelling inspired by Polish folk tales. It begins quietly, almost questioningly, then builds through various episodes, pastoral scenes, conflict moments of peace, before exploding into a coda that's among the most technically demanding passages in the piano repertoire. Jerome navigated it all with mastery. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every note, following the story Jerome was telling with his fingers. When he reached the famous coda, a passage that requires the pianist's hands to leap across the entire keyboard at impossible speed while maintaining perfect clarity. Jerome attacked it with ferocity. His hands were a blur. The notes cascaded like a waterfall, precise and powerful. The final chord rang out. More applause, though more restrained than after the Rachmaninoff. The audience sensed that Jerome was building towards something, that each piece was a chapter in a larger story. Next came Beethoven's Appassionata Sonata, one of the composer's most emotionally intense works. If the Chopin had been intimate, the Beethoven was volcanic. This was music of barely controlled rage, of passion so intense it threatens to tear itself apart. Jerome had chosen this piece deliberately. It represented his years of frustration, of working jobs that didn't fulfill him, of watching his gift go unused, of the anger he'd never allowed himself to fully feel. Now he felt it. All of it. And he channeled it into the Beethoven. The first movement is relentless. It doesn't let up, doesn't give the listener or the performer a moment's peace. Jerome played it with an intensity that was almost frightening. His whole body was involved now, not just his fingers, but his arms, his shoulders, his core. He was attacking the piano, wrestling with it, demanding that it give voice to emotions too big for words. The second movement provides brief respite, a slow, hymn-like interlude. But it's a false peace. The tension is still there, coiled and waiting. Then comes the third movement, and all hell breaks loose. It's one of the most demanding finales Beethoven ever wrote, requiring superhuman technique and stamina. Most pianists are exhausted by this point in the sonata. Some can't maintain the intensity all the way through. Jerome was exhausted. His arms ached. His fingers hurt. Sweat was running down his face, dripping onto the keys. But he didn't let up. If anything, he pushed harder. This was his chance, maybe his only chance, to play Carnegie Hall. He was going to leave everything on that stage. The final page of the Appassionata is a test of endurance. Rapid, repeated notes, massive chords, passages that require both hands to cross over each other at high speed. Jerome played it all flawlessly, his technique holding up even as his body screamed for rest. The final chords crashed like thunder. Jerome's hands came down one last time and he held them there, letting the sound reverberate through the hall. The applause this time was different. It wasn't just appreciation, it was awe. The audience had just witnessed something special, something that would be talked about for years. This wasn't just a good performance. This was historic. Jerome stood and bowed, his tuxedo soaked with sweat, his hair disheveled, his hands shaking from exertion. He looked out at the audience and saw people on their feet again, but this time the applause had a quality of reverence to it. In the front row, his mother was sobbing. Raymond had his arm around her shoulders, tears running down his own face. Victoria was standing with her hands clasped over her heart. Reginald Whitmore was shaking his head in disbelief. Jerome sat back down. One more piece. The finale. The piece that would bring this journey full circle. He'd chosen Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, arranged for solo piano. It was an unconventional choice for a classical piano recital, but Jerome didn't care about convention. He cared about telling his story. The Rhapsody in Blue is quintessentially American. It's jazz and classical high art and popular music all mixed together. It's about someone from ordinary circumstances reaching for something extraordinary. It's about the American dream, about possibility, about hope. It was perfect. Jerome began the famous opening, the clarinet glissando translated to piano, that sound that everyone recognizes even if they don't know the piece's name. And then he was off racing through Gershwin's gorgeous melodies, his technical mastery now in service of pure joy. After the intensity of the Beethoven, the Gershwin felt like release, like celebration, like coming home. The piece builds and builds, adding layers of complexity, moving between different themes and moods. Jerome played it all with infectious enthusiasm. He was smiling now, actually smiling, while performing something he hadn't done all night. This was fun. After all the intensity, all the emotion, all the weight of expectation, the Gershwin reminded everyone, including Jerome, that music could simply be joyful. The famous piano cadenza came that section where the pianist gets to show off, and Jerome showed off. His hands danced across the keys, playing with the rhythms, adding his own improvisational touches, making the Gershwin his own. And then the final push to the ending, the big, brash, celebratory conclusion that Gershwin does better than anyone. Jerome played it with everything he had left, which wasn't much. He was running on pure adrenaline now. The final chord rang out huge and triumphant and definitive. For a moment, silence. Then the hall exploded. People were standing, screaming, stomping their feet, crying, laughing, embracing each other. The ovation was deafening. It went on and on and on. 10 minutes. The standing ovation lasted 10 full minutes. Jerome stood at the piano, overwhelmed, not sure what to do with his hands, not sure where to look. He bowed again and again. He blew a kiss to his mother. He waved to the upper tiers, but the applause didn't stop. Finally, someone from the audience shouted encore, then others joined. Encore, encore, Jerome looked backstage. Patricia was there, nodding enthusiastically. Yes, encore. Jerome sat back down at the piano. He hadn't planned an encore. He was exhausted. He'd given everything he had. But there was one more piece he wanted to play. The piece that started it all. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, Major, Opus 9. Number 2. The piece he'd played for Victoria 6 months ago when he was auditioning to save the Gala. The piece that had convinced her to take a chance on a janitor. Jerome played it now with complete simplicity. No flash, no showmanship, just the notes pure and honest and beautiful. It was like a lullaby after a storm. After all the intensity of the recital, this gentle piece was exactly what the audience needed. Jerome played it thinking about Mrs. Henderson, who'd first taught him this piece when he was 13. He played it thinking about his mother, who'd worked 3 jobs so he could have piano lessons. He played it thinking about everyone who'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. When he finished, the applause was softer, but no less heartfelt. People stood again, but quietly this time with reverence. Jerome stood one final time, bowed one final time, and walked off the stage. His Carnegie Hall debut was over, and it had been perfect. Backstage was chaos. People crowded around Jerome, Patricia, members of the Carnegie Hall staff, reporters, who'd somehow gotten back their musicians who'd been in the audience. Patricia pushed through to him. Jerome, that was extraordinary. The reviews are going to be incredible. I've already got 3 major orchestras wanting to book you. This is just the beginning. But Jerome couldn't process any of it. He needed to see his mother. He pushed through the crowd and made his way to the front of the house where his mother was waiting with Raymond and the medical transport team. When she saw him, Patricia Walker reached out her shaking hands. Jerome knelt beside her wheelchair and took them. "Baby," she whispered, "I am so proud of you. So proud. We did it, Mom. Together. All of it." "No," she said firmly. "You did it. This was all you. It was always us, Mom. Always." They stayed like that for a long moment, mother and son, while around them the crowd surged and people congratulated Jerome, and the world spun on. Finally, the medical transport team needed to take Patricia back to her care facility. Jerome kissed her forehead and promised to visit the next day. As she was wheeled away, Raymond approached. Jerry, you were magnificent. Just magnificent. Thank you for pushing me that night. If you hadn't encouraged me to speak up, none of this would have happened. You would have found your way eventually. Talent like that doesn't stay buried forever. Victoria appeared elegant as always. Jerome, I don't have words. What you did tonight was transcendent. The Jerome Walker Performing Arts Hall is truly yours now. More people came to congratulate him. Sophia Martinez, the scholarship recipient who'd been in the audience. Preston Caldwell, who shook Jerome's hand and said, "You've set a new standard. Thank you for reminding me what real artistry looks like." Reginald Whitmore appeared with a check. "Another $1 million for the scholarship fund. After what I heard tonight, it's the least I can do." The celebration continued for hours, but eventually the crowd thinned. The venue cleared. Jerome found himself alone in the green room, still in his sweat-soaked tuxedo, trying to comprehend what had just happened. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Walker, this is David Henderson again. I was in the audience tonight. My mother would have been so proud. You honored her memory beautifully. Thank you." Jerome sat down, suddenly exhausted. 6 months of preparation. 1 night of performance. And now it was over. Except it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Patricia knocked and entered. "The reviews are starting to come in. Do you want to hear them?" "Sure." She pulled up her phone and read. The New York Times. Jerome Walker's Carnegie Hall debut will be remembered as one of the most significant piano recitals of the decade. His technical mastery combined with profound emotional depth creates performances that transcend mere music and become spiritual experiences. She scrolled. The Washington Post. Not since the young Horowitz has a pianist announced themselves so definitively on the Carnegie Hall stage. Jerome Walker is not a feel-good story. He is a great artist, period. She kept scrolling. NPR. Walker's performance proved that genius can survive decades of dormancy and emerge not diminished but deepened by life experience. This is what happens when extraordinary talent meets hard-earned wisdom. Jerome listened to the reviews, to the praise, to the validation of everything he'd worked toward. It felt surreal. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked. "Grateful," Jerome said. "And tired, and like I just want to go home and sleep for a week." Patricia laughed. "Fair enough. But I need to tell you about some opportunities that have come in just tonight during your performance. The Cleveland Orchestra wants you as a soloist next season. The Aspen Music Festival wants you to headline. Deutsche Grammophon is ready to move forward with the recording contract. And there's interest from London, Berlin, Tokyo. You're going to be touring internationally, Jerome. That's incredible. But Patricia, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this for fame or money. I'm doing it because I love music and because I want to help kids like Sophia. Every opportunity we take has to serve that mission. I understand. And I promise you we'll build a career that aligns with your values." Jerome stood up. "I need to go home. Process all of this. Can we talk tomorrow? Of course. Jerome, enjoy this. You earned it." Jerome left Carnegie Hall through the stage door and was immediately confronted with a crowd of people waiting for autographs. He signed programs, took photos, thanked people for coming. Finally, he broke free and started walking toward the subway. It was past midnight. The city was quieter now, the streets less crowded. As Jerome walked, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From Baltimore to New York, from prodigy to janitor to concert pianist, from invisible to seen, from forgotten to celebrated. But beneath all the external changes, he was still the same person. Still the kid who'd fallen in love with piano at age 4. Still the son who'd sacrificed his dreams for his mother. Still the man who believed music could change lives. The difference now was that people were listening. People were seeing him. And he had a platform to help others to make sure kids like he'd been didn't have to give up their dreams. Jerome's phone buzzed one more time. A text from Sophia. "Mr. Walker, I was there tonight. You were amazing, and I just want you to know, because of you, I'm not giving up. I'm going to Juilliard someday, I promise." Jerome smiled and texted back, "I know you will, Sophia. And when you do, I'll be in the audience cheering for you." He reached the subway station and headed down the stairs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new pressures. But tonight, he was just Jerome Walker, a man who'd played piano at Carnegie Hall. And that was everything. The weeks following Carnegie Hall were a whirlwind. Jerome appeared on morning talk shows, gave interviews to major publications, and watched as his performance video went viral with over 20 million views. But more importantly, the scholarship fund exploded. Donations poured in from around the world. Within a month, the fund had grown to $7 million. They were able to award 50 full scholarships to talented young musicians. Jerome hired a small team to manage the scholarship program. They set up auditions, created application processes, and built partnerships with music schools and conservatories. The Jerome Walker Scholarship became one of the most prestigious opportunities for young musicians from low-income backgrounds. Sofia Martinez wasn't the only success story. There was Marcus from Detroit, who got a full ride to Berkeley. There was Angela from rural Mississippi, who was accepted to the Manhattan School of Music. There was David from the Bronx, who was now studying at the New England Conservatory. Each scholarship recipient received not just money for tuition, but ongoing mentorship summer program opportunities and connections to the professional music world. Jerome was building the support system he wished he'd had. The recording contract with Deutsche Grammophon was finalized. Jerome spent 3 weeks in their studios recording an album of the repertoire from his Carnegie Hall debut, plus additional pieces. The album, titled Second Chances, was released 6 months later and debuted at #1 on the classical charts. Concert bookings came from around the world. Jerome performed with the Boston Symphony, the Chicago Symphony, the Los Angeles Philharmonic. He toured Europe, playing in London, Berlin, Vienna, Paris. He performed in Tokyo, Sydney, Sao Paulo. Every performance sold out. Every review was glowing. Jerome Walker had become one of the most sought-after pianists in the world. But he never forgot where he came from. At every concert, he included a program note about the scholarship fund and encouraged donations. He made a point of visiting local schools in every city he performed, talking to young musicians, sharing his story, offering encouragement. And he kept his promise to his mother. No matter where he was in the world, he flew home at least twice a month to visit her. Those visits were sacred, non-negotiable. Patricia learned to build tour schedules around them. 1 year after his Carnegie Hall debut, Jerome returned to the Pembroke Arts Center for a special benefit concert. All proceeds went to the scholarship fund. The Jerome Walker Performing Arts Hall was packed with people who'd known him as a janitor and now watched him as an internationally acclaimed artist. Before the performance, Victoria brought Jerome backstage to show him something. They'd installed a permanent exhibit in the lobby. Photos of Jerome from his janitor days next to photos from his performances. His old uniform displayed next to his concert tuxedo. A timeline of his journey. "We want people to remember," Victoria said, "that greatness can come from anywhere. that we should never dismiss someone because of their job or their circumstances. You've taught us all that lesson. Jerome stood looking at the exhibit at the janitor he'd been and the pianist he'd become, and he realized something important. He hadn't become a different person. He'd just become more fully himself. The skills he'd developed as a janitor, attention to detail, dedication, humility, hard work, those hadn't disappeared. They'd become part of his artistry. The years of sacrifice and struggle hadn't been wasted. They'd deepened him, given him emotional wisdom that made his performances more authentic. He wasn't succeeding despite his past. He was succeeding because of it. That night's performance at the Pembroke was special. The entire cleaning staff was given front row seats. Raymond sat next to Jerome's mother. Sophia Martinez was there, along with 20 other scholarship recipients. Jerome played the same program he'd played at Carnegie Hall, but it felt different, more personal, more meaningful. This was where it all started. This was where he'd taken the first terrifying step back toward his dream. When he finished the final piece, the standing ovation lasted 15 minutes. People were crying, cheering, celebrating not just the performance, but the journey, the story, the impossible triumph of it all. Afterward at the reception, Raymond pulled Jerome aside. "You know what the best part is, Jerry? You're still you. All this fame, all this success, and you're still the same guy who used to share coffee with me at 3 a.m. Of course I am. Why would I change? Most people would. Most people would forget where they came from, who helped them along the way. But not you. That's why people love you. Not because you're a great pianist, though you are, but because you're a good man." Jerome hugged his friend. "I learned everything important from people like you, Raymond. From people who treated me with dignity when I was invisible to everyone else. I'll never forget that." 2 years after his Carnegie Hall debut, Jerome's career had reached heights he'd never imagined possible. He'd performed at the world's most prestigious venues. His recordings had won Grammy nominations. The scholarship fund had grown to $15 million and had helped over 200 young musicians. But the most meaningful moment came not on a concert stage, but in a hospital room in Baltimore. Jerome's mother's health had been declining. The doctors said it was her heart worn out after years of stress and hard living. She was 83 now, and the end was approaching. Jerome canceled a European tour and flew home. He spent every day by her bedside, holding her hand, talking to her, sometimes just sitting in silence. One afternoon when she was having a good day, alert and clear-minded, she told him something he'd never known. "Jerome, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." "What is it, Mom?" "When you gave up Juilliard to take care of me, when you stayed in Baltimore and worked those jobs, I tried to stop you. Do you remember? I remember you saying I should go, but I couldn't leave you. What you don't know is that I called Juilliard. I spoke to the dean of admissions. I explained the situation. I begged them to hold your spot, to defer your enrollment for just 1 year until we could figure out my care situation." Jerome stared at her. "You did what they said, no. They said they couldn't make exceptions. But Jerome, I tried. I tried so hard to find a way for you to have both, to take care of me and to pursue your dream. I didn't want you to sacrifice everything. Mom, why didn't you tell me? Because if you'd known I was trying to find a way for you to leave, you might have felt obligated to go. And I needed you. Selfishly, I needed my son. But I've lived with the guilt of that for 28 years. I've carried the weight of knowing that my illness cost you your dream." Jerome felt tears streaming down his face. "Mom, you didn't cost me anything. You gave me everything. Every sacrifice I made was a choice I made freely. And I'd make it again. 1,000 times I'd make it again. But 28 years, Jerome. 28 years you could have been playing, performing, living the life you were meant to live. I was living the life I was meant to live. Those 28 years taught me things that no conservatory could have taught me. They taught me about love, about duty, about what really matters. When I play now, all of that is in the music. The pain, the sacrifice, the love, it's all there. And that's what makes the music real. His mother squeezed his hand weakly. You're not angry. You don't resent me, Mom? How could I resent the person who loved me enough to sacrifice everything for my talent in the first place? You worked 3 jobs. You went without so I could have lessons. You believed in me when I was just a poor kid from a rough neighborhood. Everything I am, I owe to you. They sat together in silence for a while. 28 years of unspoken guilt finally released, 28 years of gratitude finally expressed. Finally, Patricia spoke again. I'm proud of you, baby. Not because you're famous or successful, but because you're kind. Because you use your gift to help others. Because you never let success change who you are. I learned that from you. Then I did at least one thing right. 3 days later, Patricia Walker passed away peacefully in her sleep, with Jerome holding her hand. The funeral was small, just close friends and family. But word got out, and hundreds of people sent flowers and condolences. Sophia Martinez came. Raymond came. Victoria came. Reginald Whitmore sent a massive donation to the scholarship fund in Patricia Walker's name. At the funeral, Jerome spoke about his mother, about her sacrifices, about her love, about how every note he played was a tribute to her. My mother taught me that success isn't measured by what you achieve, but by what you give. She gave me everything she had, and she asked for nothing in return except that I be a good person. I've tried to honor that, and I'll keep trying for as long as I have breath in my body. After the funeral, Jerome took a month off from performing. He needed time to grieve, to process, to figure out who he was without his mother as his anchor. During that month, he made a decision. He called Patricia Holmes. I want to create something new, a music school in Baltimore in the neighborhood where I grew up, a place where talented kids can get top-quality training regardless of their ability to pay. Can we make that happen, Jerome? That's a massive undertaking. We're talking millions of dollars, years of planning. I don't care how long it takes. This is what I want my legacy to be. Not the performances or the recordings, but this. A place where kids like I was can develop their gifts without having to choose between their dreams and their families. Then we'll make it happen, Patricia said. We'll make it happen. The Jerome Walker School of Music opened 5 years after that conversation. It was housed in a renovated warehouse in Jerome's old Baltimore neighborhood with practice rooms, performance spaces, and teaching studios. The school offered free or heavily subsidized training to talented young musicians from low-income families. Jerome recruited faculty from top conservatories, paying them competitive salaries from the school's endowment. He taught a master class there once a month, working directly with the most advanced students. Sophia Martinez, now a successful pianist in her own right, joined the faculty as a teacher. The school also offered support services beyond music tutoring, college prep, mental health counseling, financial literacy. Jerome had learned that talent alone wasn't enough. Students needed comprehensive support to thrive. Opening day of the school was one of the proudest moments of Jerome's life, even more than Carnegie Hall, even more than the Grammy Award he'd won. This was real. This was lasting. This was change. At the dedication ceremony, Jerome stood in front of the assembled students, teachers, and community members. My mother, Patricia Walker, believed that everyone deserves a chance to develop their gifts. She made incredible sacrifices so I could have that chance. This school is my way of honoring her memory and extending that chance to as many young people as possible. He paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. Kids who reminded him of himself at their age. Kids with talent and dreams but limited resources. kids who now had a place to belong. Talent exists everywhere, Jerome continued. In every neighborhood, every economic class, every background. But opportunity doesn't. This school is about creating opportunity. It's about saying that your zip code doesn't determine your potential. Your bank account doesn't determine your worth. Your circumstances don't define your future. I was a janitor who became a concert pianist. Not because I was special, but because people believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Because people gave me chances. Because people saw my worth when society told them I was invisible. Every student who comes through these doors will get that same gift. The gift of being seen. The gift of being believed in. The gift of opportunity. And my hope is that someday, some of you will create your own schools, your own programs, your own ways of giving back. Because that's how we change the world. Not one person becoming successful, but one person lifting up others, who lift up others, who lift up others. A chain of generosity that never ends. The applause was thunderous. But more meaningful than the applause were the faces of the students, especially the youngest ones, who were seeing for the first time that someone like them could make it. That dreams were possible. That they mattered. After the ceremony, a young girl approached Jerome. She was maybe 10 years old, carrying a violin case. "Mr. Walker, I'm Ashley. I'm going to study here." "That's wonderful, Ashley. Do you love music?" "Yes, sir. I practice every day. My teacher says I'm talented, but my family can't afford a private violin teacher, so I'm really grateful for this school. Ashley, let me tell you something. 10 years from now, maybe 20, you're going to be a successful musician. And when that happens, I want you to remember this moment. Remember how it felt to be given a chance. And then I want you to give that same chance to someone else. Can you promise me that?" Ashley nodded solemnly. "I promise, Mr. Walker." Jerome watched as Ashley ran back to her parents, excited to explore her new school. And he thought about the chain of generosity. Mrs. Henderson had given him a chance. His mother had sacrificed for him. Raymond had encouraged him. Victoria had trusted him. Reginald had funded him, and now he was passing it on. To Ashley. To Sophia. To the 200 scholarship recipients. To the students at the school. To thousands of young musicians who would benefit from the programs he'd created. This was the real success. Not the performances, or the recordings, or the fame. This, the passing on of opportunity. The multiplication of dreams. Jerome walked through the school's hallways, listening to the sounds of students practicing. Violin scales, piano arpeggios, vocal warm-ups. The sounds of potential being developed, of dreams being nurtured, of futures being built. He thought about his mother, about how proud she would have been to see this. He thought about Mrs. Henderson, about how this was the ultimate fulfillment of everything she'd tried to teach him. And he thought about himself, the 47-year-old janitor who'd taken a terrifying chance on a desperate night, and how that one moment of courage had rippled out to touch thousands of lives. Music had given him so much. And now finally he was able to give back. 10 years after his Carnegie Hall debut, Jerome Walker was 57 years old and recognized as one of the greatest pianists of his generation. But he measured his success differently now. The scholarship fund had awarded over 1,000 scholarships and had grown to $50 million. The Baltimore school had expanded to 3 locations and served 500 students. 22 of those students had gone on to major conservatories. 3 were now professional musicians. Jerome still performed, but more selectively. He chose concerts that supported causes he cared about, venues that aligned with his values, programs that challenged him artistically. He'd recorded 5 albums, all critically acclaimed. He'd won 3 Grammy Awards. But the performance that mattered most to him was the one he gave every year on the anniversary of his mother's death. A free concert in Baltimore, open to everyone, no tickets required. He played in parks and community centers anywhere people could gather. Those concerts weren't about technical perfection or critical acclaim. They were about connection, about bringing music to people who might never set foot in Carnegie Hall, about honoring his mother's belief that art belonged to everyone. Sofia Martinez had become a renowned pianist in her own right. She'd performed with major orchestras and released her own recordings. But she still taught at the Baltimore School, still mentored young musicians, still believed in the mission. One afternoon, she and Jerome were having coffee in the school's common room, watching students practice. "Do you ever think about how different your life would be if you'd gone to Juilliard at 19? Sofia asked. Jerome considered the question. "Sometimes. But honestly, I don't think I'd be who I am now. The Jerome who would have graduated from Juilliard at 23 would have been a good pianist, maybe even a great one. But he wouldn't have understood the music the way I do now. He wouldn't have had the depth, the wisdom, the empathy. You think the suffering made you better, not the suffering itself. But what the suffering taught me, about resilience, about what really matters, about the dignity of all work, whether you're cleaning floors or playing Carnegie Hall. Those 28 years weren't wasted. They were preparation. That's a remarkably generous way to view it." Jerome smiled. "I've had a lot of therapy to get to this point. But yes, I believe it. Every experience we have shapes us. The question is whether we let those experiences make us bitter or make us better. I chose better." Sofia nodded. "You know, there's a documentary crew that wants to do a film about you they've been calling Patricia." "I know. I'm thinking about it. But only if they focus on the school and the scholarship program, not on me personally. I'm not interested in being celebrated. I'm interested in changing systems, creating opportunities, building something that will last beyond my lifetime. That's already happening, Jerome. You've already built that. We've built it. You, me, all the teachers, all the donors, all the students who've gone on to create their own programs. It's never one person. It's always a community." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching a young cellist work through a difficult passage, stopping and starting, frustrated, but persistent. "That kid reminds me of you," Sofia said. "How so?" "She's not the most naturally talented student here. But she works harder than anyone else. She won't give up. And that determination is going to take her far." Jerome walked over to the practice room and knocked gently. The girl looked up. "You're doing great," Jerome said. "But try shifting your weight slightly forward on that passage. It'll give you more control." The girl adjusted her position and tried again. The passage came out cleaner. "Oh, wow, that's better. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Keep working. You're going to be excellent." As Jerome walked back to Sofia, he reflected on how much had changed. 10 years ago, he'd been invisible. Now students lit up when they saw him. His advice was sought after. His name opened doors. But the most important change was internal. He'd stopped seeing himself as a failure who'd wasted his potential. He'd started seeing himself as a person who'd made difficult choices out of love, who'd found his way back to his passion, and who was now using his second chance to create opportunities for others. That shift in perspective had been everything. "Sofia, do you remember what you said to me after the Carnegie Hall performance? About how I showed you that it's possible? Of course. That moment when you called me and thanked me, that was when I really understood what I was supposed to do with this second chance. It's not about my career or my success. It's about showing other people that their dreams are possible, that setbacks aren't permanent, that it's never too late. You've done that for thousands of people, Jerome. We've done it, and we're going to keep doing it. As long as there are talented kids who need opportunities, as long as there are people who've been told they can't, we're going to keep building, keep creating, keep opening doors. That's a lifetime of work, good Jerome said. I've got a lifetime to give. 15 years after his Carnegie Hall debut, Jerome received an invitation that stopped him in his tracks. Juilliard wanted to award him an honorary doctorate and invite him to give the commencement address. Jerome sat with the letter for a long time, emotions swirling. Juilliard, the school he'd been accepted to 43 years ago, the opportunity he'd given up, the road not taken, and now they wanted to honor him. He called Patricia Holmes, who was still his manager after all these years. What do you think? I think it's a beautiful full circle moment. And I think you should accept. It feels strange. I never actually attended Juilliard. What right do I have to speak to their graduates, Jerome? You have every right. You're one of the most successful and respected pianists in the world. You've built programs that have changed thousands of lives. You embody everything Juilliard claims to value. Of course you should accept. Jerome accepted. The commencement was held at Lincoln Center in the same complex where Jerome had performed dozens of times over the years. As he sat on the stage in his academic robes, waiting to receive his honorary doctorate and give his address, he thought about 19-year-old Jerome, devastated at having to give up his Juilliard spot. If he could talk to that young man now, what would he say? When it was time for his address, Jerome approached the podium and looked out at the sea of young faces in their graduation caps. These were the students who'd made it through Juilliard, the ones who'd had the opportunity he'd been denied. He didn't resent them. He celebrated them. Class of 2040. Jerome began. You've just graduated from one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Congratulations. You've worked incredibly hard to get here, and you should be proud of yourselves. I was accepted to Juilliard 43 years ago. I was 19 years old, and it was the happiest day of my life. And then 2 months before I was supposed to start, I had to give it up. My mother got sick, and I had to stay home to take care of her. For years, I thought that was the end of my story. I thought I'd lost my only chance. I worked as a janitor, cleaned floors, and convinced myself that dreams were for other people. But here's what I've learned in the 43 years since I was supposed to be sitting where you're sitting. Your path is not your destiny. The opportunities you miss don't define you. The setbacks you face don't limit you. What defines you is how you respond when things don't go according to plan. Some of you will have straightforward careers. You'll graduate, join orchestras, perform, teach, thrive. That's wonderful. But some of you, maybe most of you, will face obstacles, financial challenges, personal setbacks, moments when you question whether you should continue, moments when it seems like everyone else is succeeding and you're falling behind. In those moments, I want you to remember something. Talent doesn't have an expiration date. Dreams don't die unless you kill them. And sometimes the longest path to your goal teaches you things the direct path never could. I didn't play piano for 28 years. 28 years. And when I finally got back to it, I was better than I would have been if I'd never stopped. Because those 28 years taught me about life, about sacrifice, about what really matters. That wisdom made me a better artist. So my advice to you is this: don't measure your worth by how quickly you achieve success. Don't compare your timeline to anyone else's. Focus on becoming the best musician and the best person you can be. Use your gift to serve others. Stay humble. Stay hungry. Stay kind. And when you do achieve success, whatever that looks like for you, remember that you have a responsibility to help others, to open doors for people who are where you once were, to create opportunities for those who come after you. I didn't go to Juilliard, But Juilliard still shaped my life because the dream of coming here pushed me to become the musician I am today. And now I have the honor of supporting students who are living the dream I once had. Your diploma is not the end of your education. It's the beginning. You'll learn more in the next 10 years than you learned in the past 4. Stay open. Stay curious. Stay committed to growth. And remember, success is not about you. It's about what you do for others. It's about the students you'll teach, the audiences you'll move, the lives you'll touch. That's the real measure of a meaningful career. Congratulations, graduates. I'm honored to share this day with you. Now go out and change the world. The applause was immediate and sustained. The graduates stood, their families stood, the faculty stood. After the ceremony, dozens of students approached Jerome. Many of them were scholarship recipients from the Jerome Walker Scholarship Fund. They thanked him, shared their stories, told him how his program had changed their lives. One young woman, a violinist, said something that stuck with Jerome. "Mr. Walker, I was about to drop out of Juilliard last year. I couldn't afford it even with financial aid. I was going to go home and give up. And then I got your scholarship. You saved my dream. And now I'm graduating and I have a job with the Philadelphia Orchestra. Thank you." Jerome hugged her. "Congratulations. And remember, when you're successful, help someone else. Keep the chain going. I will. I promise." As Jerome left Lincoln Center that day, his honorary doctorate in hand, he felt a profound sense of peace. The circle was complete. The dream he'd given up at 19 had found its way back to him at 62, transformed and deepened by everything he'd experienced in between. He wasn't the pianist he would have been if he'd come to Julia. 19. He was better, more complete, more human, and that was worth the wait. And that was worth. Jerome Walker continued performing and teaching for another 10 years. He gave his final public recital at age 72, 45 years after his Carnegie Hall debut, and 53 years after he'd first been accepted to Juilliard. The concert was held at the Jerome Walker Performing Arts Hall at the Pembroke Arts Center, where it had all begun. It was a benefit for the Scholarship Fund, which had now grown to over $200 million and had helped over 5,000 students. The program was simple, the same pieces he'd played at Carnegie Hall all those years ago. Rachmaninoff, Chopin, Beethoven, Gershwin. But this time the performance was different. Not technically perfect. His fingers were slower, his hands occasionally cramped. But emotionally, it was the most profound performance of his life. Every note carried the weight of 72 years of living. Every phrase was informed by decades of joy and sorrow, success and failure, loss and redemption. The audience knew they were witnessing something special. Not just a great pianist's final concert, but a masterclass in how to live a meaningful life. When Jerome played the final notes of the Gershwin, there was silence. Then slowly the applause began. It built and built until the entire hall was on its feet, celebrating not just the performance, but the man, the journey, the legacy. After the concert, Jerome stood on stage and spoke to the audience one last time. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This hall means everything to me. It's where I worked as a janitor. It's where I first found my courage to play again. And now it's where I'm playing my final public concert. I've had an extraordinary life. Not because of the performances or the awards or the recognition, but because I've had the privilege of helping young musicians find their paths. Because I've been able to create opportunities for people who needed them. Because I've been part of a community of artists and educators who believe that music can change lives. My mother, Patricia Walker, taught me that success is measured by what you give, not what you achieve. I've tried to live by that principle. I hope I've made her proud. To all the young musicians in this audience, I want to leave you with one final thought. Your worth is not determined by your circumstances. Your talent is real, even if the world hasn't recognized it yet. Your dreams are valid, even if they seem impossible. And your time will come, even if it takes longer than you hoped. Stay patient, stay persistent, stay true to your gift. And when success comes, use it to lift others up. Thank you for letting me share my music with you all these years. It's been the honor of my life. The applause went on for 20 minutes. People were crying, embracing, celebrating the end of an era. Jerome Walker retired from public performance that night. But he continued teaching at the Baltimore School, mentoring young musicians, and managing the scholarship fund until his final days. He passed away peacefully at age 85, surrounded by former students, colleagues, and friends. Sophia Martinez was there holding his hand. His memorial service was held at the Pembroke Arts Center's Jerome Walker Performing Arts Hall. Over 2,000 people attended. Former students performed. Scholarship recipients shared stories. Colleagues paid tribute. But perhaps the most moving moment came when a young pianist, a recent graduate of the Baltimore School and a scholarship recipient, played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece Jerome had played for Victoria all those years ago when he auditioned to save the Gala. As the last notes faded, everyone in the hall knew they'd witnessed the continuation of Jerome's legacy. The chain of generosity continuing, the circle renewing itself. One person giving opportunities to others, who give opportunities to others, who give opportunities to others. Forever. That was Jerome Walker's true masterpiece. Not the performances he gave, but the lives he changed. Not the music he played, but the music he made possible in others. And that legacy would endure long after the final applause faded. Jerome Walker's story reminds us that talent can survive dormancy, that dreams deferred are not dreams destroyed, and that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. His journey from janitor to concert pianist is remarkable. Yes, but it's not the success itself that matters most. It's what he did with that success, how he used his platform to create opportunities for thousands of others, how he never forgot where he came from or who helped him along the way. In a world that often values speed over depth, youth over wisdom, and individual achievement over collective uplift, Jerome's story offers a different model. One where setbacks become preparation, where sacrifice leads to deeper understanding, and where success is measured by what you give rather than what you achieve. The scholarship fund he created continues to this day, managed by Sophia Martinez and a board of former students. It has helped over 10,000 young musicians afford quality music education. The Baltimore School has expanded to 8 locations across the United States, serving thousands of students every year. And perhaps most importantly, those students are now creating their own programs, their own scholarships, their own ways of giving back. The chain continues. Jerome's legacy lives in every young musician who receives an opportunity they couldn't otherwise afford. In every student who stays in music instead of giving up. In every person who hears his story and realizes that their own dreams might still be possible. His life teaches us that we should never judge people by their job titles or their current circumstances, that everyone deserves to be seen, to be valued, to have their gifts recognized, that the person cleaning your office or serving your coffee might be extraordinarily talented, just waiting for their chance. It teaches us that second chances exist even after decades, that courage can be found in the quiet decision to step forward when everything in you wants to retreat. That vulnerability, admitting you have a gift, asking for an opportunity, risking failure, is not weakness, but strength. Most importantly, Jerome's story teaches us that true success is about multiplication, not addition. It's not about adding achievements to your own resume. It's about multiplying opportunities for others, about creating systems that outlast you, about building a legacy of generosity. The next time you see someone working quietly in the background, cleaning, serving, supporting, remember Jerome Walker. Remember that you don't know their story. You don't know what gifts they might possess, what dreams they might carry, what courage might lie dormant within them. See them, value them, and if you have the power to create opportunities, do it. Because you never know whose life you might change. Because somewhere out there right now, there's another Jerome Walker. Someone with extraordinary talent but limited opportunities. Someone who's given up on their dreams because life demanded it. Someone who's invisible to the world around them. And maybe, just maybe, they're one chance away from becoming who they were always meant to be. Don't let them stay invisible. See them. Believe in them. Give them the opportunity. Because that's how we change the world. One person at a time. One opportunity at a time. One act of generosity that ripples out and touches thousands. That's Jerome Walker's legacy, and it can be yours too.